Morning, everyone. We've got some new hardware up here, so bear with us today. We're learning how to use it. This is the Swanee River Water Management District Governing Board meeting and public hearing. It is February 13th, 2024, 9 a.m. We'll call this meeting to order. If everyone would rise for invocation and pledge.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, Lord. We thank you for the many blessings that you've should give us in this district. Father, we pray that you keep your hand upon us and lead us and guide us. Give us wisdom to direct the progress of the maintenance and beauty of this wonderful district that we live in. Father, I pray for the staff and this board that they will use wisdom and judgment in the governing of the lands that you've placed in our care. In Jesus' precious name, amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All righty. Ms. Robin, let's do a roll call.
Chair Johns,
Here?
Mr. Keith.
Here.
Mr. Schwab.
Here.
Mr. Smith.
Here.
Mr. Sessions.
Here.
Mr. Thompson. Mr. Lloyd.
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Robin. Are there any amendments to our agenda? Okay. Is there a motion on our agenda?
Make that motion, Madam Chair.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. Motion carried. We will now open our meeting up to public comment. And I think I've got only one card here. And would you like to do
Yes.
an introduction?
We're going to hear from one of my local Taylor County residents today. He's a friend of mine. We've done some traveling together with our families and raised our kids together, and he's a fantastic guy. Used to work for GP for several years and has a unique understanding of kind of the hydrology and how the mill works and water usage and a whole bunch of other stuff. But he's also got some issues that he wants to address about some flooding concerns over in Taylor County. So, Mr. Parker, you're more than welcome to come.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Please, English is my second language, so please forgive my Spanglish as we go along with this. Yeah, my name is Genaro Parga, and I have been a resident of Taylor County for 42 years. Worked at the paper mill for 33. So I understand the ins and outs of the mill. You know, I had the role of a planner, electrical planner for the entire mill. So we are experiencing some very unusual flooding situations right now in Taylor County right now. The situation that we are having to deal with, you know, the county cannot offer us relief of what for the problem that we're seeing. A little bit of background here is the paper mill that currently is closed and will be closed in Taylor County used to have a usage of 30 million gallons of water every day. As well, you know, we have a discharge. So during the years of Procter & Gamble owning the plant, the EPA requested to change the classification of the river, as you guys know, from industrial river to a regular, you know, swimmable, fishable type. So Procter & Gamble put a lot of effort to try to get this thing resolved. And through the years, they were working with the EPA and everybody as well. When Procter & Gamble sold, a group of ex-employees of Bucca, of Procter & Gamble, purchased the mill, and it became Bucca. Along with the efforts that Procter & Gamble have done, they continue this effort, you know, to try to change that status of that river. So the EPA basically requested for us to create that was an offer that the mill had, a pipeline straight to the estuary of the Gulf of Mexico. So many of these studies were done during the early 2000 years, you know, and through many studies, they realized the impact that was going to have beneficial impact to the county if we were to restore what is considered the bay, San Pedro Bay. There are, I don't know how many thousands of acres of wetlands. In the past, during the early 50s, they have already drained that bay and used it for plantation. That's where they used to plant pine trees. And it was very successful. Procter & Gamble maintained all those roads. Procter & Gamble maintained all the waterways. Procter & Gamble did an excellent job. Buckeye continued doing that. But at the sale of Buckeye Corporation, Buckeye LTD, I think it was, or something like that, Georgia Pacific took over. The project that Procter & Gamble and Buckeye had started was continued by GP because now they have committed to the state now to restore that wetland back to a normal state, normal habitat. The Swanee River Management, the EPA, the Florida Corps of Engineers, and others had a little bit of feedback and actually were supporting the effort. However, I don't know if there was a follow-up of what the outcome of this project was. Ecologically, that project was very successful. They restored the wetlands like they expected. But again, like I said, in 4 years that I have lived there, we had never experienced any flooding situation like we have. I understand we have had months of heavy rain, but the correlation of the precipitation is not there to the amount of water that is in the ground. Right now, Taylor County is experiencing on the northeast a tremendous amount of flooding. Hundreds of acres of trees have been lost because of the flooding. Myself, I have lost about 7-8 acres of nothing but beautiful oak trees. In another parcel that I have lost probably about 5-6 acres of pines. The flooding there is unusual, and yes, we can relate this to the precipitation and all of that, but it's not there. It doesn't equate. When the mill closed, they, again, stopped extracting 30 million gallons of water a day. With the bay closed and all the ports, all the exits to the rivers, the Osceola, the Fenner Holloway, the Ecofini, there's no water for that water to escape. So my concern, and I expressed that to Richard, is there any follow-up that you guys did with Georgia Pacific? Because Georgia Pacific, once that they finished the project was complete, there was no follow-ups. There was nothing to continue these studies. So I don't know if you guys have had the opportunity or if you have anybody else coming here to expose that situation that we're living in Taylor County. Again, the county commissioners are waiting for some of you guys, I believe, to reply, and you guys are working with them, and they are patient. The problem is that just in the month of December, we had quite a bit of rain. But we have had more rain in previous years, and we never seen the flooding that we are seeing today. My personal experience is for the last 8 weeks, I've been pumping water, probably about 50,000, 60,000 gallons with 3 pumps just to get it out of my property and flooding other of my property. But I'm on the small case compared to others in the county. So I'm not sure if you guys have the resources to look into this because this matter is going to get worse. The mill is not going to reopen. The water that was extracted by the mill will be there. 30 million gallons of water every day. We're seeing some flooding that we had never seen along Highway 30 on Puckett Road. The Fenholloway River discharges to the Gulf of Mexico. But right now the water is so high, it's almost to the edge of the road. It's a situation that is going to get worse. So I'm here basically speaking for a lot of people that are not present. But if there is any resources or if there's any way that we can get, maybe the University of Florida would have, students researching this situation, maybe they can help us. Because I don't see no end to it. The worst part is that this is not even the rainy season, We average about 3 or 4 inches of rain in December. This has been a very unusual December. But the rainy season is going to be about 9-10 inches. So if we are experiencing this flooding now, what is it going to be in the future? Not having the mill pumping that much water. So that was my situation here. Thank you, Richard, for inviting me to come talk to you guys and make you aware of what we're experiencing there. And it is not just Taylor County. You know, driving to Liveoak today, this morning, you can actually see right around Mayo, Dayton, Lafayette County. There is issues there that need to be addressed too, all possibly related to the same situation. Okay? Well, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Do we have any comments on that particular issue that we need to bring up at this time, or?
Yes, ma'am, Madam Chair. I would offer that Amy has a presentation that she and staff have prepared relative to the groundwater conditions and rainfall conditions over in Perry and Taylor County area. With that, we were going to present that following Robbie's hydrological report, but the preference of the board, if they would like to see that information now or wait until after Robbie's report.
I think probably just go ahead after Robbie will do the presentation for
Okay.
Dr. Brown, okay? All right. Thank you very much for coming today. All right, so do we have, let me see if I can find my agenda here, keep up with it. We'll close public comment at this time, and we have a consent agenda. If everyone has had an opportunity, and if we have any announcement on the consent agenda.
Yes, Madam Chair. I'll recuse myself from voting on the consent agenda due to item number 19 with Alliance Grazing Group, their sibling organization to Swanee Valley Feeds.
Okay, thank you. And you filed the paperwork already?
Yes, I did.
Thank you. All right, is there a motion on the consent agenda?
Make that motion, Madam Chair.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. Motion carried. All right, let's see here. We'll go right on into our hydrologic conditions report.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'd like to present the hydrologic conditions report for January 2024. My thanks this month goes out to Stephanie Armstrong. She sent me this nice photo of Little Fanning Spring over in Fanning Spring State Park. She snapped this while she was out. I believe she was with a group of folks that were out looking to find a place to put a staff gauge in for the Park Service. And I thought it was a really nice photo. If you haven't had a chance to walk out there, it's a little bit off the beaten path in Fanning Springs State Park, but Little Fanning's very, very nice looking, and it's really good to take a look at if you get a chance. My thanks again goes to Stephanie. I think it's a great way to start our hydro report for January 2024. All right, our rainfall for January 2024, we had a district-wide average of right at 4.3 inches. That represents about 17% higher than that 1932 to 2023 average of 3.6 inches. I did want to point out that we did have a 12-month surplus increase from December when we had 4.6 inches of surplus to 6.1 inches of surplus at the end of January, and that's due to some of the increase in rain that we got in January. Looking at the map, that 4 to 5 inch range encompasses that district-wide average, and interestingly, we see a lot of that average condition and higher up in the northern part of the district, but we do see some of that down in the southern part as well. Lower than average amounts, that 3 to 4 inch range in that light blue, and then that dark blue, and then that light blue is less than 3 inches. Mainly kind of over in the southern parts of the district, but we got this big swath through Gilchrist County, Columbia County, Union County, Baker County, and even over in the Steinhatchee, all showing less than 3 inches of rainfall for the month. Conversely, 5 to 6 inches, that first area that's higher than the average, that's that orange color, it kind of dominates up in the northern part, but we do see some of that in Levy, Dixie, Alachua, up into Bradford as well. More than 6 inches of rainfall, that's in the red color. We see that kind of stretching up from Jefferson, Madison, Hamilton, down into Taylor and Swanee counties. All saw more than 6 inches of rainfall in that red color for the month of January. Our biggest window of a rainmaker that we had this month was a 4-day window from January 6th through the 9th. We got a district-wide average of 2.3 inches, which represents about 55% of that average for the month we got in 4 days. That 2 to 2.5 inch range in green, it encompasses that 4-day average of 2.3 inches. Once again, we see it kind of dominating up in the northern part, but we do see a big area of that down in the southern part as well. Interestingly, we see this big swath right here again of the lower than average amounts. less than, 1.5 to 2 inches in dark blue, and then that less than 1.5 inch in the lighter blue color, up from Dixie, Lafayette, Suwannee, Columbia, up into Baker and Union and Gilchrist counties. Higher than the average amounts, 2.5 to 3 inches in orange and 3 to 3.5 inches in that red color. Once again, you see a lot of that frontal boundary marks up here in the northern part of the district. Did see some of that down in Levy and Dixie counties as well. And then we did have some areas with more than 3.5 inches, and that's seen over in Taylor County, Madison County, over into Columbia and Baker counties as well for those for that 4-day window. Unfortunately, this month, February, has not been quite as wet as the past couple months have been. So we are seeing some deficits at this point in our district. We're seeing anywhere, this is the past 30 days, this is from the National Weather Service, so that we're seeing anywhere from 1/2 inch to 1 inch in light yellow, 1 to 2 inches in that darker yellow, 2 to 3 inches in that lighter orange color, pretty much all over the district. And then we do see some areas of 3 to 4 inches of deficit up in Jefferson, Madison, even down into Gilchrist counties as well. So we're hoping that maybe we can get a little bit more rain to kind of get rid of some of these deficits that we have currently since the beginning of February. With that said, though, the stream flow conditions for January, the end of January, actually were still pretty high. We had 8 gauges that began the month in the the greater than 90th percentile, that high. The Alcilla at Lamont, Econfina, Finn Holloway, and Steinhatchee, and then on the Suwannee, White Springs, Ellaville, Branford, and Rock Bluff all began in the high, and out of that, all but the Econfina fell into the above normal, that 75th to 90th. The Econfina actually stayed in that high, that greater than 90th percentile, to end the month of January. Elsewhere over in the Santa Fe Basin, we saw some areas, some gauges, New River and Worthington Springs, that began and ended the month in the above normal, that 75th to 90th percentile. While we had Graham and Fort White gauges over in the Santa Fe, both began the month in the above normal and then ended the month falling down into that normal, that 25th to 75th percentile range. Elsewhere in our district, Withlacoochee at Panetta and Alapaha at Jennings both began and ended the month in the normal range. So all in all, still kind of elevated conditions at the end of January, but we'll see kind of what we get this month with our rainfall. This is the Upper Florida aquifer levels. This is the end of December. I want to show this just to compare with what we had this month. So last month for December, we were showing an increase in the above 90th percentile area, stretching up into Madison, Taylor, down into Dixie, Hamilton, Columbia, over into Alachua County, and then Gilchrist had a well too staged up in the above 90th percentile. And that's on top of the 75th to 90th area, which is stretching way down into Dixie County, Levy County, all the way into Hamilton as well. I did want to point out on here, we had a lot of wells increasing from, I guess that would be November to December. That's because December had quite a bit of rainfall as a district-wide average. And also we had the center part of the district still showing that 25th to 75th percentile, that normal range. We fast forward to this month, we're seeing actually an increase in area of the above 90th percentile. We're stretching over into Madison, Hamilton, over into southern Baker, and down into Gilchrist still. Dixie County had a well that was showing above 90th percentile as well. That 75th to 90th still kind of increasing into Suwannee, kind of on a periphery. Columbia County, Union, Bradford, Alachua, and of course Dixie and Jefferson are all showing that 75th to 90th percentile for well levels as well. The center part of the district, 25th to 75th percentile, still kind of very similar to what we saw back in December. And we did have some wells that started trending downward, and that's just because we had so much rainfall in December and not as much rainfall in January, so those wells weren't quite as high. But the downward trending wells, we do see some of those in Jefferson, Taylor, down into Lafayette County, I believe up into Hamilton, and I think Columbia may have one as well. So all in all, aquifer levels still riding pretty high unless you're in the center part of the district, which they're still in the normal range. With that said, the U.S. Drought Monitor, this was released last Thursday, February 8th. I wanted to point out that no part of the district is in abnormally dry or moderate drought at this point. Although we are showing some signs of deficits in our district, we're not seeing anything that's going to cause us to drop down into one of these abnormally dry or drought categories. The only area really in Florida that we're seeing that is there's abnormally dry and moderate drought down near the Tampa Bay, and that's been there for a little while. I have seen the preliminary maps for this week, and they look very similar to what we see this week as well, or what we saw last week. So I don't expect any major changes on the U.S. Drought Monitor for this week. I did want to talk about the Climate Prediction Center and National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's El Nino Southern Oscillation probabilities. This, of course, is the La Nina, El Nino. We're currently in the El Nino advisory still, upwards of 100%. January, February, March, and April. But as we start to move forward, the predictions kind of go down a little bit, about 75% from March, April, and May for El Nino. And then interestingly, April, May, June, the El Nino Southern Oscillation neutral conditions have a higher probability, around 79% chance of that occurring in our area. And March, May, June, July, that one's around 68 or so percent. And interestingly, it's looking like June, July, and August at about a 55% chance of a switch over to a La Nina. So it's not going to take long for us to go from an El Nino to neutral conditions to La Nina. And unfortunately, that's going to be right in our hurricane season. And that's not an ideal climate pattern to have for hurricane season, especially in the Atlantic. But that's something that looks like we're going to have to deal with, especially since it looks like the probabilities of that going on into the year are pretty high. And they do increase as you go down the blocks of the months. I did want to point out, of course, we are still under the El Nino advisory, but at this point, they also said we're under a La Nina watch. And that's simply because we've got that 55% chance of that occurring from June, July, and August. But with that said, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's seasonal outlook from February through April, we're still showing above normal rainfall probabilities, which is still characteristic of the El Nino that we are still under currently. And most of the southern United States is going to see that above normal rainfall probabilities for February through April. We do have near normal temperature probabilities predicted by NOAA from February through April as well. And once again, most of Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, up into South Carolina are going to see those near normal chances for temperature probabilities. All right, finally, our January 2024 summary. We had a rainfall amount of 4.3 inches. That represents about 17% higher than that long-term average of 3.6 inches. We did increase our surplus since the end of December when we had a 4.6-inch surplus. We increased that to 6.1 inches at the end of January. District-wide upper Florida and aquifer levels actually rose from the 77th percentile to an average of the 83rd percentile, and that's due to a median level increase across our monitored wells for this report of about half a foot. I did want to mention, too, the transition to El Nino Southern Oscillation neutral conditions are likely from April through June with about a 79% chance. And then from that, we're looking at about a 55% chance of a transition to a La Nina from June to August of this year, just right in time for early summer, right in time for our hurricane season. And finally, as I mentioned, no portions of the district are currently experiencing any drought conditions according to the U.S. Drought Monitor. I don't expect that to change anytime this week with the draft maps that I've seen currently. With that, Madam Chair, I'll be glad to take any questions that the board may have.
Any questions from the board?
I have a question.
Okay.
If it typically, I'm not to hold you to anything, but typically if we shift over to La Nina, is that typically more or less hurricane activity?
Madam Chair, may I? So typically, La Nina is going to be, those restrictions on hurricanes aren't there, so you don't get the wind shear like you get with an El Nino. So it's basically taking the brakes off of it. So if we have a warm Atlantic and that fuel is there to fire the hurricanes, it doesn't have anything to stop it like it would with an El Nino. That one provides a lot of upper atmosphere wind shear. It didn't. I'd like to say it was going to do that this past year, but we had quite a hurricane season, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Sure.
So that answer is yes, we probably have more activity?
I wouldn't say, well,
Intensity?
the chances are there. I would say the chances are there. It doesn't necessarily, it's more or less a handicap on that. When you have an El Nino, that handicap's taken away.
Sure.
So it's, the formations are more the, stuff coming off Africa, the upper atmosphere, wind shear, things like that you have to deal with on that.
Any other questions? I've got one more on the La Nina. I know normally in June is our regularly wet season, so are we going to expect more rain out of La Nina, or is it a drier period?
So La Nina, for our area, is a drier and warmer area, or warmer time. I would expect us to be a little bit drier. However, we did see this past, no two La Ninas are the same, same with El Nino. It could be a little bit wetter, but chances are, on average, with these systems, the El Nino is wetter and cooler, the La Nina is warmer and drier. That's what you can typically expect. Now, like I said, that triple dip La Nina that we had the past couple of years, or past 3 years, that one, we had some really wet times in the summer. So it just, like I said, not all La Ninas are the same, but on average, we do expect to have a drier and warmer time.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
All righty. Dr. Brown? Good morning.
Madam Chair, members of the board, I am not accustomed to being the bonus content for this. I'm going to do my best here to try to pull together some of the information that we've been looking at here, and I appreciate the on-the-ground reports that we have. It is something that we're definitely going to have to look at in more detail than what I'm presenting here, but I just wanted to provide an overview of kind of what we're seeing in the data. So this is kind of just recapping some of the rainfall information that we have here. As has been reported, it has been very wet and very wet recently, but not the wettest it ever has been. So this is just the rainfall summary showing the rainfall since September 1st of 23. So you've got a lot of areas of 22 to 25 inches, and then you've got kind of some of the surrounding areas over 28 inches. Similarly, the last 90 days, that color band has changed now, but still you're looking at more than 20 inches in the vicinity, and then more immediately in the 16 to 18 and 18 to 20 inches of rain in the last 90 days. This is as of running up through January 30th of this. And then it is a little bit less rain, but still for this time of year, it's a higher than average amount of rain that you're getting in this area in Taylor County. So then if we look at what that means, and you just saw this slide from Robbie, I actually stole this slide from his presentation. We're at above the 90th percentile for a good swath of Madison, Taylor, and Lafayette counties. If you look at the historic rainfall, just running the time point since 2018 up through 23 in terms of where we are in terms of rainfall, we're above average. It was about 64 inches of rain that we got last year. But even if you look back to 2018, that was 74 inches of rain that you got there. So it's not the highest rain that we've ever had in this area for sure. There are some other factors that probably are influencing how the water is behaving on the land surface. Some of that is the timing of this rainfall. When you get the rain in the winter, you have less plant activity to take that up in evapotranspiration. So you do certainly have decreased ability of the environment to help move that water off the land surface. We also have a situation here similar to what was experienced in Michael, which is that there's been some tree damage associated with the hurricane, and that also impacts the ability of those plants to take up water. We also have potentially some obstructions in some of the drainways because of the storm damage. Then we also have these changes in pumping. So what we're doing here is we're kind of looking at some of our regional tools to look and see what we're seeing. But again, I'll talk about next steps, and one of those is to do a more detailed analysis that couples groundwater and surface water data that we have for this county in a much more detailed way. As we're thinking about what's going on in Taylor County, this is land surface elevation. So we're looking at the LiDAR data and the things marked on the map here. Oh, there's my dot. Okay. So these are some of the river gauges that we have along the Fenn Holloway River. The star there represents the location of the GP cellulose plant within Taylor County, and you can see that you're having the drop off of elevation as you're moving from San Pedro Bay to the coast. And then similarly, if you look at the water levels, just the general kind of standard levels in the Floridan aquifer, again, you've got a potentiometric high in the San Pedro Bay, and then the water is draining towards the coast, and it's kind of preferentially draining towards the Fenn Holloway River. And you do have some springs along the Fenn Holloway River where you get some of that pickup in flow. So again, I've got the same image here. I'm going to show you data from two river gauges. One is the Fenn Holloway River near Foley, which is up gradient of this star, which is the plant The other one is the Fen Holloway River near Perry, which is downstream from where the withdrawal was. The permitted withdrawals are about 40 million gallons per day for this facility at this point in time. Up until September of this last year, they were using about 36 million gallons per day. In September, they stepped that usage down about 10 million gallons per day, 10 to 15 million gallons per day, and then they've stepped it down again in October. They are still currently using some water based on the information that we've gotten, but it's just over 10 million gallons per day that they're currently using. So there has been a change in water use. This is the flow record. The top one is the one that I pointed out, up gradient of the Foley plant. The bottom line is the flow downriver from the plant. On the y-axis, this is really weird to use. Okay, on the y-axis, you have the flow in cubic feet per second, and then you have time along the bottom. I know some of the fonts are kind of small. We're starting in the year 2018 here, and we're working our way up through 2024, where we're just starting to populate that information. There are a couple of things that changed during that time frame, what were previously mentioned during the public comment period. So starting in 2020, well, there was construction of a pipeline in 2020, and what that did is the groundwater was being withdrawn by the facility, and previously it was being returned to the river near the plant. And so what you saw a very flashy system that really responded to rainfall up gradient of the plant. But then as you work your way down, that as we saw, the Florida aquifer is coming down, but also the land surface coming down. You're picking up water to the river from that area. And so you can see a pickup in flow from above the plant to below the plant. And some of this flow that was being picked up was actually the flow of the water that had been pulled out of the ground and then returned to the system on the site. When the pipeline was put in, then during these dry times where you're basically not getting any base flow to the river, you can see that there was a drop in the flow downstream from the plant, and that is because the water being pulled out at the plant was being put in the pipeline and was being returned at the Gulf. So you're losing some of that base flow based on that change in flow that was put in place. And so that's what you're seeing here, is that the low flows in the river came down. So now, again, we've got a situation where the pumping has changed. So now the water is no longer being pulled out of the ground as much. We've dropped by about 20-some million gallons per day based on what was happening before. So you do then see, again, during these times where there's relatively less water coming down from the top, you're seeing that the pickup and flow that you're getting is similar to maybe what was being seen before the pipeline went in. So you're seeing that flow coming back to the river, but in this case, it's not being pumped out and returned in a single point. It's being kind of gained by the river between those two river gauges. So if you look at where the withdrawals were happening historically, these are the wells associated with the permit, these orange dots, and again, this star is the Foley plant. So if we try to understand what our regional model is suggesting about how that might influence the flow, if you look at again, those two same river gauges, from the influence up gradient here, there's a relatively minor 1 CFS influence on flow as you go down gradient of that to where the withdrawal was occurring. That's about 27 CFS of change in flow that would be occurring if you pull that water out and then you don't return it back to the system, but you let it go to the Gulf instead. So that's the influence of the pumping on the river flows, but there's also an impact on the regional area where you would expect to see potential for some areas in the superficial aquifer to be influenced by the pumping that was occurring at that plant. And so, again, these are regional planning tools. In the context of regional planning tools, what we see is an area that is shown here where we would expect to see that the superficial aquifer might be higher based on the change in pumping that's occurring at the Foley site. And then similarly, the other piece of information that's on here, which I do not have all of these included in the presentation, but certainly all the data is available. So we have a number of wells throughout Taylor County, and we have data for all those wells where we can track the levels going back some distance in time. And all of these had data going back to at least 2018. Many of them go back much further than that. And so what you can do then is you can look at those levels and try to understand the influence of the different factors on those levels. But that level of analysis is what we're talking about that needs to be done to try to tease apart what the different factors are, and then long-term, what does that mean in terms of where you would see levels in the region. But as an example, I just have one well in this presentation. Again, the other data is available and can certainly be shared. But if you look at the Foley Tower Upper Florida Aquifer well that's here, kind of in the center of the area where we would expect to see some potential change in aquifer conditions. What you see here, and again, this is, I know these are small, this is the level of the well here. This is time going forward. So starting in 18 and running through the current year. This is rainfall on the top in inches, just kind of showing the rainfall that we've had. And again, although we've had a lot of rain, it's not the highest rain that has happened in Taylor County even since 2018. And so what we are seeing is that we are getting levels that are above what we have seen in the last 5 years, even keeping in mind that that is not the most rainfall we've gotten. Like I said, there are other factors, including the timing of the rain relative to what season it is, the potential that tree damage could have impacted the ability of trees to take up water. Nonetheless, the water is higher than we have seen. And so, again, in terms of where we go from here, we are drafting a task work assignment to do a more detailed analysis of flows and levels in Taylor County with the thought of trying to look at some of the concerns that have been raised. We're also going to be updating the county commission later this month, and we're going to continue to coordinate with the county and identify what we need in terms of data and what we need in terms of assistance for moving forward. With that, I would be happy to take questions or direct them to other people.
Any questions from the board?
May I ask
No.
a question? Currently, the owners of most of the GP land is Fort Rivers. The mill is not running anymore. The bay was closed, all the canals were closed. They were trying to restore the environment back to the 50s, to the natural habitat. No longer the mill is going to be pumping down the water. Is there any way we can open or suggest to Fort Rivers, you guys helping us, to open some of these canals and put some kind of flow control if the bay is actually the issue? Because if we let some of that water in the bay out, like normally was for 40 years or longer, we never experienced this in town. Could it be possible to get involved and allow us to do some drainage from time to time? And the environmental impact to the San Pedro Bay has been a success. You guys did a good job. The problem is the county, the town, is going back to the 50s. Going back to the 50s when there was a natural environment. There was all these, people living in town. The town has grown. There's more people. There's more farming. There's more tree plantation. But yet, the Fort Rivers, who owns that land now, has blocked all these gateways. Any way that we can look into that? Is that a possibility?
I would kick that to Leroy.
Leroy Marshall is in the audience. I'd be happy to speak to this question. Please speak to the microphone.
Madam Chair,
Yes, please.
I believe that anything like that would need to be permitted. Well, I don't believe that. I know that. It would need to be permitted, and there would be some criteria and some thresholds that we would need to look at in order to do a project like that. Obviously, the owners of the property would be the ones that would come in and request that permit, not the district going out and doing a project like that. So it would be the property owner's responsibility to come in, put a plan together, and have our review team look at that and possibly permit it if it meets all the criteria of state.
Can I ask?
Yeah,
Can
go
I
ahead.
ask? Leroy? Oh, okay. Leroy, you're saying that a project like that or other will require a permit. So and we're talking about maybe 20 years ago when Buckeye, Florida owned the mill. and they bought a sizable tract of land in San Pedro Bay to form the headwaters of the Finn Holloway River for this pipeline project that was enacted a couple of years ago. They had to they had to pull permits to be able to close those canals and that drainage off. Is that correct? That was already there?
Madam Chair, so that I understand the question, are you talking about back in the,
About back 15, 20 years ago, when Buckeye, Florida owned the mill, they knew they wanted to restore the Finn Holloway River. They were required by the state of Florida to restore the Finn Holloway River to swimmable, fishable river like every other river in the state of Florida. So they devised a pipeline plan, and they put that pipeline in. Just recently, GP took the mantle up, and they finished that project. But in order to be able to have some water resource for the Finn Holloway River at the headwaters up there, they bought, I think it was close to 40,000 acres of land, maybe less, I don't know. But they bought a sizable chunk of land from Foley at the time, which is Four Rivers today. And they blocked off all the canals, and they held that water up there in the bay. And that's still happening today. Would they have pulled permits, but Buckeye, Florida pulled permits to be able to block up all those canals and do that headwaters project?
the assumption that I would say would be yes, that there was some kind of permit issued. I am not sure if it was us that did that, or whether it was DEP, but I would assume that there would have been, again, I don't know off the top of my head that was.
Because I think to piggyback on Mr. Parker's question there, and some of people in Taylor County were wondering, is if the mill stopped taking 30 million gallons of water a day out of the aquifer, according to their permit, or if it's 50 million, whatever that number is that they were using. And that water staying there now, and now we have on top of that right there a compounding factor of a previous permit that's holding water in the bay. Could there be, going back to those permits, could there be some adjustments made because there's no longer a usage of that water, and all that land's still owned by GP? When the mill sold 10 years ago, GP acquired all those water projects, all those permits, all that pipeline work. They acquired all that right there. So the landowner for that water holding project in the bay right now, or San Pedro Bay, is owned by GP, not Four Rivers. It's owned by GP. And those canals are blocked up by GP. And now GP's no longer using the amount of water coming out of the aquifer. So could there be a way that we, as the district, look at those permits and figure out how we can make adjustments for what the community's experiencing today of the flooding because the water's not being used?
Madam Chair, I believe that and I'm gonna make an assumption that that activity was permitted. The landowners could go in and modify that permit to, change the operating schedule or change whatever. Typically, permits are perpetual until they're changed. So, changing that permit is a possibility. Again, some type of plan would need to be put together, and the landowners would be the responsible party to go in and modify that permit. But yes, I think it could be done. You would just have to go through the steps of modifying the permit.
So how do we, as the district, knowing that we have some flooding issues and we're trying to piece together, Dr. Brown did a great job of putting a lot of pieces of the puzzle together, and we're going to present that to the Taylor County Commission. How do we, realizing that there could be a problem, there is a problem, there's potentially a problem of all this flooding, how do we go back to the permittee holder or the landowner or the mill owner and say, you're causing, we speculate that you're causing a problem here, and we need to make some adjustments to get some water flow out of here? How do we proceed to do that as a district and as Taylor County citizens and other things like that right there? Because we see that there's a problem. So how do we address this problem? You're looking at me.
Madam Chair, if I,
I mean, Madam Chair, if I may, I mean, one of the things I can speak on definitely is one of the things that we're working on in our office is that TWA. We are, and it seems to always work this way, is we are actually getting ready to start flood mapping for 2D flood mapping for that entire area. And so we already have a consultant in place ready to start that 2D mapping. Again, that's surface water mapping. So what the TWA we're working on is getting the groundwater model, running that model pre and post the mill, and then adding that to the surface water model to see what those differences produce. And it will help show areas where you would have excessive flooding all over that entire region. So, you know, I think it's a collaborative effort that everyone needs to just sit down and try to work things out and try to find, you know, put the pieces together to address the situation. But as far as what the projects team is doing, that's when Dr. Brown talked about the task work assignment. That's the task work assignment we're working right now to put together so that we can see those differences when you add that groundwater model to the surface water model as we're doing the FEMA floodplain modeling.
So the follow-up question to that statement, I appreciate the hard work. I know you guys are working hard. What is your estimated timeline on completion to get this project rolling? Because a lot of the citizens in our area, the time is ticking because they're concerned about dog days coming in the summer, another hurricane or tropical system coming and raining. I mean, there's some of this flooding is coming up to the edges of homes. And really these homes, you know, typically where we've seen some flooding in Dixie and other places where people have located their houses in low areas, these spots that they're having flooding in are not traditional low areas. They're traditionally all uplands. They haven't flooded in 40, 50 years. You know, now maybe it did in 1957 before the mill came. I don't know. But today, you know, a lot of history's been happening since 1957. So, I mean, what's your timeline on trying to get this mapping and modeling done? Yeah, I know the engineer's ready to go, but I mean, typically a couple months, 6 months, a year?
Madam Chair. So I would expect the project that I just discussed to start probably in the summer. A lot of that has to do with the timelines and the pre-study requirements that FEMA has that we have to do. So I would expect that study to start summer, late summer, early fall. Typically, that modeling takes about a year when you're looking at both. In addition to that, what's going to be starting a little earlier than that is the vulnerability assessment modeling that UF is doing with us. They are going to be starting here in the next month or so. Their model is assuming that the groundwater is high, that there's not a low. So you're going to get a little bit of an idea of what's going on with the vulnerability assessment. That, again, should be about a year. So, but they're starting about 4 or 5 months before the FEMA study is starting. So next year, and I know that that's not what everybody wants to hear, but it takes time to get these models and everything done because of all the inputs and stuff that's in them.
Yes, sir.
And prior to the Fingala River acceptance project, there was multiple studies done. Did those studies be reused to get results? I mean, FEMA was involved, EPA was involved. There's documentation that it states the fact that there was areas in the bay that were accumulating more water than the precipitation that fallen in that year. That was 2018. Documentation that is in the mill where all these reports that were mentioned already exist. You may have some copies of them. Oh no. The documentation exists, and it was established at that time in 2018 that San Pedro Bay was holding more water than the precipitation that had fallen that year. And I don't remember exactly what organization, but they did a consulting firm, I believe from Tampa, have stated the fact that there was an abnormal amount of water on the surface that was not correlated to the precipitation. And this was 2018, when the bay was starting to be close to this point, it was kind of in the middle of it. Could that information be reused to just jump from there and go forward to get the results sooner?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Any information that we can get is gonna help assist with the studies and everything. I mean, if we can get our hands on it and we can look at what the results are and that those results can be used, we can use them.
Well, GP has them in the file. And GP no longer can open the doors to us, the community. Basically, they have closed the door when, they left us there. I'm sure there's a copy of these reports of FEMA or EPA. Where you guys can reach out to them and see if they can provide that information that has already been done. UF did part of that study, so there should be a record of that information somewhere in the files. You don't have to start from scratch, it's already there. The closure of the canal, the closure of the gateways, I got a copy of it, you wanna see it, I tell you exactly where they're closed. Because that was done during that project. So if that helps, I mean, we talked to Four Rivers and maybe ask them to, as a trial, allow us to put some gateways there, allow some of this flow to leave the bay for 6 months. The environment's not gonna be affected in 6 months. We have waited 40 years to restate the wetlands again, and it was a successful project. It can't happen again. If we control the water, mitigate the amount of water that is being retained in the bay, and keep this town from going through a flooding situation. The rainy season, like Richard said, is coming. The dog days are coming. With this La Niña and El Niño, we don't know what's going to happen. So I'm just throwing that because during my years of work at the mill, I was able to participate in all this stuff. And I know that the information exists. There's files already there that will give you the foundation for your study.
Yes.
I was just gonna say, any information that we can get is gonna be a benefit to the efforts that we're having. And again, when you talk about changing what's out there, you're talking about some type of permitting, modifying permits, or whatever that case may be. So, the thing to walk away from is, I'm not saying no. And no one's saying no, it's just we gotta go through the steps to make those. And I'm happy if I'll get you my card, let's start a conversation. Let's make something happen. I mean, I'm open to whatever the board and the ED and my supervisor will allow me to do.
Yeah, we'll be glad to. I'm sure Taylor County Commissioners will be glad to assist in any way because they're being flooded with phone calls. People are just desperate in many situations. Any help we can get from you guys here, any input that I can give to you or anyone else in the town would be, sure would be willing to do it.
All right, that sounds good, and I'm sure, yes, go ahead.
When and how do we enlist the Army Corps of Engineers in this whole process?
Madam Chair. We can bring them in at any time. From what I understand, they are already doing a study in Taylor County. I believe we heard that when we were over there meeting for the vulnerability assessment, for the hurricane assessment that we had with the state. I believe the Corps is already doing some kind of study over there. I can reach out to them if need be.
It looks like they need all the help they can get.
Madam Chair. Wouldn't Taylor County's emergency management team already be gathering this data and know who's doing data work in the area and looking at releases for the water, and whether it be by permit modification or new releases? Wouldn't they already be studying this themselves?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I have not spoken with Taylor County, so I don't know what they're doing specifically for this.
Yeah, I understand our side on Leroy. My question is, Taylor County, what are they doing right now? I know what they're asking us to do. I'm curious, the emergency management team has a plan.
Madam Chair, if I could add.
Yes, sir.
We have been in contact with the county and working with them, and as you can see, we're scheduled to go and present some of the results that you saw today relative to that, and work with them. There's an emergency order that's in place right now that would enable the county to access state funding and emergency funding to do some of the work in that area, Mr. Charles. Part of that, which some of it would have to be identified, and it has been done in some of our other coastal counties, has been to look at doing some ditch cleanouts. Certainly relative to Idalia, some of that work has been done, and it continues to need to be done in some of those areas. Relative to the mitigation bank in San Pedro, as I understand it, that is a DEP permitted mitigation bank. And so it would take a modification of that permit. We've been in contact with DEP about that. It would have to be identified and evaluated as to how much less water would need to be held to maintain the hydrology of that wetland, and then the construction associated with whatever would be needed to remove the ditch blocks or other activities that had been done there relative to the flows. We've also met with the Office of Resilience relative to a project going forward based upon the outcome of this information, trying to secure funding really for the study, a more in-depth study, and then also for the construction aspect of whatever that study recommends coming out, going through there. I just want to make the board aware that we are trying to work with them and work with the county on there. And, I'm hopeful that the county, once they see the information that we've got, they will want additional help as well in trying to determine what, I don't think it's any one source that's causing the flooding. I've been over there several times with this. So it's going to have to be a multifaceted approach to alleviate the issue.
That'd be my
there right
point.
now.
Don't focus on this one thing. Is the emergency management team putting together a data on the whole county as a whole? I mean, it may not be that modification of this one permit's the answer.
Right. Yeah. No, I don't think it will be. I mean, we've identified some staff and working with the county, we've identified some other areas that need to be addressed as well, that can be contributing to some of the additional flooding that's south of Perry in that area there, work that needs to be done.
Now, the LiDAR showed to the coast being lower. Lower levels. So I don't know if they have some way to release water other than the Finn Hollow
Way.
River.
I mean, that's natural
Well,
release.
You've got several coastal rivers through that area, and certainly a number of tributaries on there. And if you'll recall, that was ground zero for Idalia coming ashore in that area. There's been a lot of work done relative to that, but I think that there's still additional work that needs to be done from a drainage
There's
aspect.
possibility that there's still debris between
Yes, sir.
impeding flow. My whole point is that I would think the county would have this information. They live there, they know what's going on. And I'm all about giving them all the help we can give them. We're on board. Don't put all your hope in one basket. Let's look at the whole picture. And
Right.
The fact that the storm
Come, if you don't mind, come up to the microphone.
Yeah, the comment that I would like to make is the flooding situation that we are experiencing in town. It didn't start this year when the storm came. This has been going on for 3 years, steady, and it's documented. So the Idalia hurricane caused the blockage of many causeways, no doubt.
Right.
But the rain in the surface water has been an issue for the last 3 years. As you see on your chart right there on the rainfall, we haven't had a very unusual rainy season in December. But it was about 5 inches. The average is about 3. Well, July, August, you're looking at about 10 to 13 inches the last 3 years in Taylor County. So what is to expect if we don't clean those ditches, like you're saying, the causeways? We're going to continue holding more and more water in a land that is already saturated. That's our concern. A year's time, I don't think this really something that we in Taylor County are looking for. We would like to see a little bit more, move things forward as quick as we can. And I'm sure this emergency management, you got a point. I haven't heard anything in town that these guys are actually doing, but behind the scenes, they may be working on it. I don't know. So that would be something to bring on the meeting. So next meeting in February, I think I'll be there and you will be there too.
Have you presented this information at a commissioners meeting?
Yes.
Got your commissioner involved?
Yeah, we got them involved. The only thing I got is they were going to call the road department. Right now, what we have been experiencing on my street is that we got water about 18, 20 inches. And like I said, I've been pumping probably 40,000 gallons of water in the last 8 weeks. I got 3 2-inch pumps going 3 or 4 hours a day, and it's not feasible,
Yeah.
I'm retired now, Social Security don't pay that much. You guys know that. So that's a fact. But definitely, they are paying attention to that because I am not the only one complaining. There's people who have multiple tracts of pines that are ruined. I lost my oak trees, beautiful oak trees that have been there for 40, 50 years. But people who actually have a way to make a living from the trees are experiencing that damage too. And it's spreading. It is not just on the northeast side of the county. You can go along 98 and you can see the same thing. So anyway, that's what I got. Thank you.
Good luck, sir.
Anything else?
Yeah, I just want to say, I've talked to our state legislator. I've talked to our congressman. And there's nothing, because of the economic as well as the environmental impacts of the mill closing, there's nothing that they won't, that's within their power, that they won't be able to pull off. So if it's funding that we're lacking or motivation, if our local politicians need to be motivated in a little bit better manner, or even our emergency management or anybody else, the road department, whoever's not responding, our county management, whatever we need to do, we can put some pressure from everybody to get things done, because not having funding or whatever the lack of motivation is not an excuse. And it can be remedied very quickly.
Agreed.
And it needs to be remedied.
Agreed.
I, for one, would love to, at some point in time, hear how the whole system has changed over time, and with the rehydrating of the San Pedro Bay and pumping the water all the way to the Gulf instead of letting it run down the river. I would be interested to see how the system has worked in the past, and with all the changes that man has done, how that's affected the drainage in that area. Don't know if that's something that we could.
Madam Chair, that's something that we could seek out. There are people who are directly involved in that process, and certainly getting them to speak versus just referencing documents would be a more compelling case. I think that's something that we could look into.
Okay, all right, that'd be great.
And to piggyback on that, Dr. Brown, I'd love to know what the hydrology, and if it's even possible to know what happened in the 40s and 50s. What was it like before we started monkeying with the system, and then we changed it, and now we're wanting to change it back? And what does that do? When you had maybe a county of 10,000 residents, and now we're at 22,000. We've been like that for 40, 50, we've been like that for over 50 years. I know since my lifetime. I mean, what does that do? What does it do when you turn the pumps off? Because of what we're used to. Mr. Parker came here 40 years ago. I came here 50 years ago. I can't remember what happened after 40 years, right? wasn't aware of it, but I'm with him. In my lifetime, I've never seen, and like what some of our landowners have done, we've cut rotations of trees on that ground that was dried. And now we're going, well, these trees are dying. And this may be the third or fourth generation or fourth or fifth landowner that's on that piece of property that maybe have farmed those trees or harvested those trees, and they're going, what's going on here? Because we've drastically changed the whole deal when we turned it off. When we turned the key of the ignition off, we changed things. The mitigation bank, all that stuff was predicated on things running, water being withdrawn. And I'd like to see that when you say the history, I'm not talking about 40 or 50 years ago. I'd like to see what happened 70 years ago.
There is relatively limited data, but there's not no data, so we can certainly look and see what we can find.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have a wonderful staff that work with me. They are listening. They were able to find the DEP permit. It was a DEP and Corps permit for the work that you were talking about, so we have a copy of that permit now.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
I always quantify things when I look at stuff, and Taylor County's got 788,000 acres. And if you're adding 100 million gallons over this last 5 months, that equates to 126 gallons per acre we've added without any rain at all. Now, that doesn't equate to a whole inch of rain or anything, but it's a steady increase of the fluid buildup, of the water buildup. So as time goes on and a whole year passes, we've added over 200 million gallons of water to all these acres. So it's just going to get worse, and without the water being drawn off and pumped out.
Madam Chair, if I may, just for clarity, there is a drain still. That doesn't mean that we're going to not need to look very seriously at the effects, but the water is draining to the Fenn Holloway and draining to these other coastal systems. But the nature of that drainage has certainly been altered, and that's certainly something that we're going to need to understand. But I don't want to leave the impression that absent that withdrawal, there would be a never-ending accumulation of water, that there is a natural drain, but the functions of that are altered, and that's something we're going to need to understand. And again, some of the change, there are a number of factors that have hit kind of all at one time, and so we're really going to need to dig in to understand the different factors.
I think you're right. I think it's a perfect storm. There's so many factors that have hit all at one time. But we've changed an awful lot. I mean, not just turning it off, but turning it on over a period of time. And I know it's going to take a little bit what the effects are going to be of whatever we go forward and do. So hopefully, sounds like we've got a lot of people working on it. And maybe next month we can get another report on this.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions?
Madam Chair, if I may, I just want to take the opportunity to thank staff. The request that came to me was, was there a way that we could look at the impact of shutting off those pumps, and what general area may we first see an impact in? So I reached out to Dr. Brown, her staff, as well as the rest of the staff that's worked on this. And they've got a pretty heavy load, but they made it a priority to get to where we are today. And I think we all realize this is much bigger than we first thought it would be when we looked at it. And it is multifaceted, like you had said earlier. So it's going to take a while, but we're going to get there.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Brown, and thanks staff too, please. All right. Cooperating agencies. Mr. Hugh, would you like to make some introductions today?
I would, Madam Chair. We actually have a number of guests in the audience this morning. I'd like to start with our neighbors to the north. They're actually sitting on our south wall right here. But we have Cliff Lewis, who is actually with the Georgia Environmental Protection Division. I think some of you know Cliff. He's been here from time to time in the past. We also have Mr. Scott Downing, who is with the Swanee-Satilla Regional Planning Council. And Amy and Sean King from our group have been going up and engaging with the Swanee-Satilla Council from time to time, presenting information on programs that we have here, our MFLs, and some of the efforts associated with that and our water resources. So we're glad that he's here. He's actually been down here before. We've met with him on a related matter. We're glad to have him back in our area as well. And then we have Shane Wood, who is accompanying them. He's with CDM, a consulting company that's working with that group as well. So appreciate them being here. Here we have in the back row as well, we have Chris Wynn, who visits us from time to time from Fish and Wildlife. Glad to see him here today and appreciate him coming over. And then we also have some presenters that you'll see later on in our workshop item from the University of Florida, IFAS. We have Dr. Bob Hockmuth, who many of you have met before out at the Research Center here northeast of Live Oak. And then accompanying him is Mark Warren, who actually is from the Levy County area. And they'll be giving us a presentation, and Mark works with IFAS as well with their extension service in that area. But they'll be giving us a presentation in our workshop related to the control release technology, some of the work that we, along with DAX, have been putting out on the ground on farms and seeing some of the results of that effort going forward. And I think that's everybody that I've got, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Glad to have all of them here today.
Thank you, and thank you for coming. I was watching a video at one of the farms up in Georgia, and apparently they are getting, or you guys are getting a lot of rain also. A lot of flooding up there. But thank you for coming. All righty. Service recognitions, have you got?
We do have some service recognitions. We actually have 3 of those this month. And Tim, along with Amy and Susie, I think, will be presenting that information. Go right ahead, Amy.
Good morning again, Madam Chair, members of the board. So I have 2 staff members who we wanted to recognize for 5 years of service. The first one is Stephanie Armstrong. Stephanie, if you could stand up. So Stephanie joined the district on January 2nd of 2019 as an environmental scientist in resource management, and she now works in the Office of Water Resources with a focus on water quality monitoring. Stephanie grew up in Ohio, which is a great place to breed scientists, and earned her bachelor's degree in environmental scientists from The Ohio State University. She moved to Florida in 2012 for an AmeriCorps position with the Florida State Parks. And she had then worked as an environmental specialist for the Florida Department of Health in Alachua County while earning her master's degree in soil and water science from the University of Florida. And not on her biography, but just putting in here, she is also currently representing the district at the National Resources Leadership Institute, the NERLI training that is being done here. So we're really excited to have her and recognize her 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then the other staff member that we have is Doug Durden. Doug, if you could stand up. So Doug joined the district on February 25th of 2019 as a senior engineer scientist. His primary focus is on groundwater hydrology and modeling. And we've also really leaned on him for his extensive knowledge about the studies conducted in the area, hydrology. We've certainly brought him into the conversations about some of this modeling that we're looking to do. Prior to working at the Suwannee District, he was employed at the St. Johns River Water Management District as a senior hydrologist with a focus on groundwater hydrology and modeling for 9 years. Prior to that, he was employed at consulting firms. He also did a stint at the Northwest Florida Water Management District, and he got his bachelor's in civil engineering and master's in water resource engineering, both at the University of Florida. We're really excited to have both of them on the staff, and we lean on both of them very heavily.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. So I have the pleasure of introducing Steve Schroeder as he receives 5 years of service with the district. Steve joined the district in February of 2019. Prior to working for the district, he was employed with Pasco Hernando State College for nearly 18 years, where he served as the assistant president of policy and as their general counsel. Steve also served as the college's lobbyist with state legislators, the U.S. Congress, and also the executive branch of Florida government. After testing the retirement orders the first time, Steve decided to return to work. He worked as a contractor with Raymond James Financial Services, helping them update and improve their contracts for corporate and regulatory compliance. Then Steve came to the district, and we'll be back next month as he tests those retirement orders the second time. Steve is a 1988 graduate of the Stetson Law School. He earned a BA in criminal justice from the University of Florida in 1985. South Florida, South Florida. Correct me. In 1985, and an AA in criminal justice from St. Petersburg College in 1983. In 2014, he earned the Poynter Institute certification for public records and ethics for public employees. He served 4 years as a member of the U.S. Coast Guard, where his duty stations included Port Clarence, Alaska, Miami, and St. Petersburg, Florida. Besides work, Steve also enjoys outdoor recreations, including hiking, biking, tennis, and golf. He and his wife love to escape in their RV for long weekends in the state parks in both Florida and Georgia. Steve's also a Civil War buff and owns several first edition books on the subject. So,
Wow.
Steve, thank you for what you do.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Reeves, looks like you're next.
I am happy to report. I don't have anything to report unless there are questions of me.
All right. Any questions for Tommy?
Did you draw a paycheck this month?
I hope to.
Okay, all right, just checking on that right over. Appreciate you, dude. That means all is quiet. You did good, sir. Everybody needs a good counselor.
That's right. All right, let's see here. Mr. Tim, take it away.
Madam Chair, members of the board, and those in attendance, again, good morning. For business and community services, you'll find items number 9 through 19 on this morning's agenda. Most of the items number 10, 14, 16, 17, and 18, as well as 19, were approved on the consent agenda. And then items number 9, 13, and 15 are informational items for you. So this morning, we'll have items number 11 and 12 presented by our Chief Financial Officer, Ms. Pam Shaw. These items will be for your consideration approval, and they begin on BCS page 9. So, Ms. Pam?
Thank you. Ms. Pam, I'm going to ask the board a question real quick before we get started. Does anyone need a break?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, we're going to take a break for, we'll be back here in 10 minutes. All right, we are going to resume our meeting. Ms. Pam, we are ready for you.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Good morning.
Members of the board. I had 3 items for you. The first one was on consent. The second one is BCS, it's the number 11, BCS number 9. It is to approve the Finance Directive number 240002. During the presentation of the investment workshop in January, it was determined that there were certain elements of the Finance Directive that needed to be updated related to our investing of our funds. So we did some cleanup of the language. We did some redundancy, removing redundancy in the directive, and we also did some reorganization of how it flows. And so you'll see a red line version in your packet as well as a clean version of the packet. The main thing that we did change is we rewrote item number E, which is the element, which is the investment of funds, so that it complies with the section 218.415(7) of the Florida statute, and which permits the district to operate without a written investment policy and allows investment in 4 different areas. Tyler, you were going to bring that up for me. So as you can see over in this area, the 4 areas that we are going to be allowed to invest our funds in. The first one is a local government investment pool. The second is the money market funds. The next one is certificates of deposits and depository accounts with a a qualified public depository, and the fourth would be the U.S. Treasury bonds. So it also delegates daily investment decisions to the executive director and the chief financial officer, placing highest priority on safety and liquidity. So the recommendation is to approve Directive Number 240002, updating the finance directive. Any questions?
Questions from the board? Is there a motion?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. Motion carried.
Thank you. My next item is item number 12, BCS 19. So in accordance with our new finance directive, the Florida statute, and in the interest of transparency, we are seeking authorization to establish 2 new accounts to invest district funds. So you'll see Resolution 2024-02, which will establish and participate in the SBA State Board of Administration Local Government Surplus Funds Trust Fund, which is called Florida Prime, and to establish the new depository account with First Federal Bank of Florida, which is a qualified public depository. So establishing the Florida Prime, the local government investment pool, and the First Federal Bank of Florida depository accounts will enable the district to maximize investment returns while placing the highest priority on safety of the principal and liquidity of the funds. Just a little bit of background on Florida Prime. It is a local government investment pool that's administered by State Board of Administration of Florida. And to remind you, State Board of Administration is also the administrator of the Florida Retirement System funds. While the local government investment pools are not insured by FDIC, they do come with a very low risk the risks are minimal. It is also considered a short-term investment strategy, and just as also information, last month's yield or interest paid on that fund was 5.6%, as opposed to where our current funds are being maintained with our special purpose investment account, which returned about a 3.6. And while that's a long-term strategy that we use, it's actually moving upwards. SPIA is moving upwards as well. So, but to establish this Florida Prime, the board, the State Board of Administration requires a resolution that's authorized by the governing board. And it also requires the treasurer to sign off on a disclosure statement to even establish the account. So the second account that we're hoping to establish is the new depository account with First Federal Bank of Florida, so that we can invest funds in the IntraFi network deposit system. Again, a custodial agreement and a deposit placement agreement would need to be signed. It has been reviewed by our legal counsel, so to establish that account, we would need those agreements signed. And once funds are placed in that account, the money will then be distributed throughout a network of banks in increments of less than $250,000, so that every piece is federally insured by the FDIC. So this would give us a good cross-section of allowable investments between a long-term investment with SPIA, a short-term investment with Florida Prime, and a very safe, liquid, and secure investment with the IntraFi systems. So the recommendation is to approve Resolution 2024-02, authorizing the district to establish and participate in the State Board of Administration's Local Government Surplus Trust Fund, Florida Prime, and approve the establishment of a new depository account with First Federal Bank of Florida to participate in the IntraFi Network Deposits, ICS, and CDARS programs.
Are there any questions? Ms. Pam, thank you. You did a great job.
Okay.
I'll make a motion.
Before we move on, I'd like to point out just a couple things that, Pam, thank you for all the work you've put into this. I don't know if the board noticed on the November to December financial statements in the operating account, Pam negotiated a higher rate of return on the operating account, which fluctuates because the amount fluctuates constantly. But from November, which was 5-something in interest, which is kind of a norm, 400 to 600, something like that. December was 6,800. Now, that's not all for 1 month. That was some catch-up that First Federal did from when we first started negotiations. So just goes to show the community support of that institution. And First Federal is the lower rate of investment that we have right now, but by far the safest with the insurance of FDIC, stuff like that. So just so the board understands fully what we're doing, we're putting some tools in the toolbox where we can make a little extra gain on the, a little more return, and maybe help with some of this storm damage that we're trying to recover from. But anyway, I appreciate all the time Pam put into this. And I will make a motion to proceed.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. Motion carried. Thank you, Pam. Thanks, Tim. All right, that brings us down to Ms. Caitlin Potter.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. The Division of Outreach and Operations has several items for you today. Items number 20, 22, and 23 are for informational purposes. Item number 21 is for informational purposes also, but I'll be presenting it for your attention. And I have several announcements as well. We'll first get started. Troy has an announcement for y'all relative to our outreach regarding our permit to protect and overall permitting program. And I'll go ahead and bring him up right now to make that announcement.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. I don't know y'all'd be hearing from me today, did you?
Good morning.
So, obviously, one of our biggest goals at the district is making information available and easy to find for our residents. And so Leroy and his team had approached myself and Tyler several months ago regarding our permitting. Right now, if a person's looking for information on permits or anything involving that, they have to go through our e-permitting program, which if you've never really used it can be a little bit complex to use, I guess. If you know what you're looking for, you're used to it by now, but for people who are just, curious about the status of their permit, it may be a little overwhelming at first. So Leroy and them approached us about making an easier way to look up information about applications that the district has received and are reviewing, and information about recently issued permits. So we created a website, which you can see here. This is the notice of receipt of applications. Our staff are updating this weekly. It includes all of the permits that the district has received over the last 30 days. So you don't have to go look up anything. You don't have to try to find the number or look up the project name. You can go here and see these are all of the projects or all the applications that we've received in the last 30 days. You can scroll down, click on the number, and it'll take you directly to that. Conversely, we also have the issuance one as well, which is also anything that has been issued in the previous 30 days. You can go on there, and as you see here, you can look up the permit number. It shows the project name, what county it is, and when it was issued. So this is simplifying this process a little bit. Now, this is only the previous 30 days, so if it's been in-house longer than that, or if it's something older than that, you still have to go to the e-permitting website to look that up. But for people who are curious about these recent permits and the ones that we're working on, this makes ease of use a lot more user-friendly and a lot easier to find the information that people are looking for. So we sent out a press release about it. It's live on our website now, but we just wanted to give you guys a brief update and show you that everybody here is working to make things easier for our residents and for people looking to do business in the community.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair. Yeah, I'd like to also point out in the permitting summary report, there were quite a few permits issued. Looks like the permitting department is doing a really good job of getting some of that backlog out. We're not just maintaining, we're above now in issuance, so good job, Leroy.
And just to brag on staff, just a sliver more about this effort that they did. I've always admired Leroy's efforts for outreach and his contagious desire to provide excellent customer service and communicate over and above what the requirements are. Certainly, the communication staff, we support that. So. And are eager to do so. And just to note, this website, these are manually updated. These are manually maintained. And so this is not a script that has been written. Now, we may seek to develop one, but this is not a script that just runs. This is manually maintained out of the regulatory office and out of Leroy's office, and certainly with support from the communications team. So I think that just speaks to the efforts that our staff have to try to be transparent, open, and provide as great a customer service as we physically can to our communities. So just wanted to brag on them for a minute. Before I get to my item, Madam Chair, if I may, I have an announcement to make relative to the Office of Land Management. If I can have Ms. Lorna Radcliffe join me at the front. The Office of Land Management is made up of a team of really hardworking folks that seek to steward 160,000 acres of fee-owned property that y'all all grant authority for us to manage. And Bill McKinstry has been a faithful member of that team and continues to be so, but had a desire to spend more time in the field and less time in the office. And so he is now serving the district as a senior natural resource specialist and overseeing our invasive rare plant species and our reforestation projects, what left us with an opportunity to hire the land management chief position. And we were able to bring Ms. Lorna Radcliffe on board. She was an internal hire and had been working for Leroy, so I was able to make a really good steal from Leroy in the projects team, and came to the district back in 2022 as a project manager. Prior to that time, she had been serving at the Florida Forest Service as a, remind me what your job was at the Florida Forest Service?
Government, environmental specialist was the last one.
So she worked a government specialist, and they are known for their nondescript titles, but she worked largely on recreation with the State Forest Program and oversaw a staff there, and has a 2-decade history in incident command and incident management as a finance section chief around the state and even nationwide as far as her service for incident management, and has received her project manager's program certification, her PMP, which has been very useful in the land management team with all the planning and the reports and the budgeting that we have to do. So we are very excited to have Lorna, and thrilled that she's a local, and we were able to retain talent within the district, not only with Bill, but also with her. Do you want to say?
Madam Chair, I just want to say thank you for affording me the opportunity to lead our land management team, and I look forward to Caitlin's leadership.
We look forward to having you in that position. I don't know how Leroy's feeling about this, but congratulations.
Leroy's fine.
Okay.
We'll just, like I said, Leroy is such a great communicator and has excellent customer service and so willing to help out all of his teammates in the community. We just really appreciate Leroy. So with that, Madam Chair, I'd like to point your attention to OPS page 3, item number 21. And just to note, this is not an item for your approval or voting. This is an item that I just wanted to bring formally for you for your information and for your awareness. So this is the transmittal of the 2024 Consolidated Annual Report. This report is required, annually every year by March 1st. Pursuant to statute 373-036. The report is a combination of the 8 reports and plans that you see listed there. Those notated with an asterisk are ones that are brought to you for approval as individual approval, which is required by the statute. which are the strategic plan. You saw that last fall. The minimum flows, minimum water levels priority schedule, which Dr. King brings. The 5-year water resource development work program, which Miss Emily Ducker brings. And then the Florida Forever 5-year work plan, which again, I've brought in the past last fall. The other reports are not required to come before you for approval. They're mostly accounting of other activities that you support. And again, everything listed in this report, y'all approve on an item-by-item basis through our budget and then through the expenditure authorities that you've granted either to staff or to the executive director, or if above $100,000 come to y'all. So again, this is just an awareness of your that the plan is being transmitted to the parties listed here: the governor, the president of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, the Office of Economic and Demographic Research, the Secretary of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, our local and county legislators, our state and county legislators, and then also it is already available on our website. And now with your acknowledgement and awareness of this plan, will be transmitted hopefully this afternoon.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And that concludes the items for the Division of Outreach and Operations.
Thank you very much. Dr. Brown, we're seeing a lot of you today, aren't we?
Good morning still, Madam Chair, members of the board. Water resources, we just have 3 items today. Item 24 is just a brief update to you, and then Ms. Emily Ducker will be presenting item number 25, which is the water supply plan presentation for the western portion of our district. And then in water resources, Ms. Susie Hetrick will come up for the Swanee River swim plan, moving that forward as well. So just to kind of set the stage here, back at the end of last year, we approved the North Florida Regional Water Supply Plan, which covered the eastern portion of our district. We're trying to bring to completion then the same companion document for the western portion of our district, and that's what Ms. Ducker will be presenting today, and we hope to bring forward for consideration for approval next month. I will say, just because it generated extensive conversation this morning, the water use in Taylor County is reflective of the 2014 through 2018 timeframe, so it does include the withdrawals that were occurring at that location. We have done some analyses to try to understand those changes, but at the same time, that will be captured in the next planning process, which we're already going to be starting for the next 5-year increment. So that's how that would be folded into the process. I just wanted to bring that up since it was a topic of conversation. Unless there's any questions, I'll hand it over to Ms. Ducker for that presentation.
Any questions? Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board.
Good morning.
As Amy said, I will be presenting our draft 2024 Western Water Supply Plan. So these first set of slides are a refresher review of some slides that were presented in the past, and then the second half of the presentation will be new information. So the Western Planning Region covers 6 partial or complete counties in the Swanee River Water Management District, which is shown in this light green shaded region. As a result of the 2018 water supply assessment, it was recommended that regional water supply planning in the Western region be initiated to include portions of the planning region that contribute groundwater or surface water to the Withlacoochee, Swanee, and Wakasasa rivers. And this region is this hatched region on the map. That's known as the Western Water Supply Planning Area. Just to remind you, regional water supply planning is required by Florida statute for areas where existing sources of water are not sufficient to meet current and future reasonable beneficial uses of water while sustaining water resources in the associated natural system. This Western Water Supply Plan is the first plan for the region, and as I mentioned earlier, regional water supply planning was initiated in 2018. Updates to the water use and population projections kicked off in 2020, with the development and review of the water use estimates in 2021. The district held technical methods workshops where we described the approach to developing the population and water demand projections, and those went through a stakeholder review and were finalized in the summer of 2022. In 2023, we developed project options to address the constraints, and the draft plan was posted for review on January 9th. We held a public workshop on January 17th, and the public comment period was open through February 7th. We did not receive any public comments from stakeholders during the public comment periods. So this graph shows the Western Water Supply Plan water use estimates and projections with population. And population is expected to increase from 90,000 people in 2015 to 97,500 people in 2045. The total water use in 2015 is 109 million gallons per day and is projected to increase to 127 million gallons per day, which is about a 16% increase. And these total estimates include both groundwater and surface water sources. The largest increase in water use is exhibited in the agricultural and public supply water use categories. For the Western Water Supply Planning region, over 99% of the existing water use is estimated to come from groundwater. So groundwater models are important tools in water supply planning as they allow us to predict changes in aquifer levels as a result of groundwater pumping. Now, we use the North Florida, Southeast Georgia Regional Groundwater Flow Model, version 1.1, to assess the water resource constraints. And water use estimates were updated for the entire NEFSEG water domain as part of this planning process. The purpose of the water resource assessment was to evaluate the extent of which water resources and related natural system may be impacted if the 2045 projected future demands are met with groundwater. The water resources that we evaluated are MFL water bodies without MFLs, wetlands, water quality parameters, including chloride concentrations, total dissolved solids, and specific conductivity, and resiliency. Constraint assessment methodologies were presented at our 2023 workshop in July. For the MFL evaluation, the percent change was calculated from pumps off to current pumping and pumps off to the 2045 projection. The percentages were then compared to the reference criteria to determine where regional coordination and project development should be focused. This map shows the location of the 31 MFL water bodies that were assessed in the Western Water Supply Planning area, which include 5 springs, 7 outstanding Florida springs, 1 outstanding Florida springs group, and 6 river reaches. Of these, the water resource evaluation determined that 12 water bodies are currently meeting and are projected to meet the screening criteria at 2045. 3 water bodies are currently meeting the screening criteria but are projected to exceed it at 2045. And 16 water bodies are exceeding the screening criteria. The 4 outstanding Florida springs on the Suwannee River are under emergency rule. And technical work is underway to establish the updated MFL. The 2 springs identified as not meeting right now are Lafayette Blue and Falmouth Springs. But upon finalization of the final MFL, the status of all 4 outstanding Florida springs on the Suwannee will be reassessed. And efforts are also underway to address these impacts, update the MFLs in the region, and coordinate with the adjacent water management districts as appropriate. There were 2 methods used for assessing assessing water bodies without adopted MFLs, and one was for flowing systems and one was used for lakes. For flowing systems, the percent change was calculated for simulated groundwater flow from pumps off to the 2045 projection, and a 10% change in simulated groundwater flow was used as the reference criterion. For lakes, the projected change in aquifer level from the pumps off condition to the 2045 projection was calculated. The change in aquifer level was used to evaluate the MFL lakes based on the lake-specific criteria. And there were 26 water bodies without adopted MFLs that were assessed. Of these, there are 10 systems that exceed the screening criteria in 2045 and 16 that met the 10% screening criteria in 2045. The water bodies along the Middle Suwannee are listed in both the Western Water Supply Plan as well as the North Florida Regional Water Supply Plan. But new as part of this plan are the water bodies along the Withlacoochee, many of which you can see are exceeding the screening criteria. Next was the wetland assessment, which used spatial data and model scenario output from the Kinzer Minnow model to evaluate the potential for adverse change to wetlands if projected demands are met with groundwater. Out of almost 754,000 acres of wetlands that were assessed, the wetland analysis identified 23,162 acres with a moderate to high potential for adverse change. The assessment provides a regional picture of potential change to wetlands. It does not identify specific wetlands at risk. Rather, it shows general areas where there's potential concern. The district's regulatory program is responsible for specific wetland verification and monitoring. So water quality data from monitoring wells in the western region of the district were statistically analyzed for each analyte for an assessment period of 5 years. The current trend of each analyte for each well is determined for an assessment period of 15 years, from January 1st, 2007 to December 31st, 2021. For chloride concentration, the secondary drinking water standard of 250 milligrams per liter was evaluated as a threshold for concentration. One well in southern Levy County exceeded this 250 milligrams per liter threshold and had a chloride concentration of 641 milligrams per liter. As you'll see on the upcoming slides, the monitoring well in southern Levy County, which shows high chloride concentrations, also shows high total dissolved solids and specific conductivity values. This well is a very deep well, greater than 400 feet, and is in close proximity to the coast. And because this well shows high concentrations for all three analytes, it indicates there's a presence of salt water. The TDS assessment showed 4 monitoring wells in Levy County that had a TDS concentration above the secondary drinking water standard of 500 milligrams per liter. And the trend analysis showed an increasing trend in 6 of the monitoring wells. However, all 6 of the wells have TDS concentrations well below the 500 milligram per liter threshold. As seen on the last slide, again, that well in southern Levy County is also showing high TDS. And the specific conductivity analysis showed 2 wells that had a concentration above 1,500 microhose per centimeter. And the trend analysis determined there were 4 wells with an increasing trend. As mentioned on the previous slide, again, pointing out this deep well in southern Levy County, showing high specific conductivity in addition to high chlorides and high TDS, indicating there is a presence of salt water in that well. And finally, the district conducted a planning level resiliency assessment to determine if fresh water supplies in coastal counties are likely to become constrained due to sea level rise throughout the planning horizon. Based on guidance established by the Resilient Florida Grant Program, the assessment evaluated the effects of both intermediate low and intermediate high sea level rise projections reported by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Considered in this analysis were the locations of current water treatment plants, wastewater treatment plants, and consumptive use permitted wells. It's important to note that this analysis is only evaluated surface inundation caused by sea level rise, and any potential impacts from fresh groundwater supplies caused by saltwater intrusion were not within the scope of this evaluation. Now, the Resilient Florida Grant Program includes a selection of grants that are available to counties, municipalities, water management districts, flood control districts, and regional resilience entities. To effectively address the impacts of flooding and sea level rise that the state faces, eligible applicants may receive funding assistance to analyze and plan for these vulnerabilities, as well as implement projects for adaptation and mitigation. Projects have been awarded to Dixie County, which covers Taylor and Jefferson counties, Levy County, Lafayette County, Madison County, City of Cedar Key, and the Town of Greenville for vulnerability assessments, and the Dixie County Board of County Commissioners, Town of Greenville, and Town of Mayo for flood mitigation efforts. So the resiliency analysis showed that there were 4 consumptive use permitting wells that are likely to be constrained in both sea level rise scenarios. These wells were either commercial, industrial, institutional wells or landscape recreational wells. So the results of the water resource evaluation indicate that traditional sources may be able to meet some, but not all of the projected water demand in the Western Planning Region. This is most evident by the water bodies that are exceeding the screening criteria. And the evaluation also identified some areas of moderate to severe potential for adverse change to wetlands and water quality monitoring wells with increasing trends in the analytes that were assessed. So based on these results, staff recommends that the Western Planning Area remain a Western the water supply planning area for the district. And since traditional sources alone cannot meet future demand while protecting water resources, the Western Water Supply Plan identifies a list of project options to meet future demand. These options consist of water supply development, water resource development, and water conservation project options, which will be described in more detail on the upcoming slides. So the district also estimated a range of water conservation potential that could offset increases in projected demand if sufficient water conservation measures were implemented. These estimates ranged from 13.3 to 14.7 million gallons per day of water that could be saved. Implementing water conservation measures can often be more cost-effective than constructing alternative water supply projects, as you'll see when we get to discussing the project options. The district also evaluated the availability of existing and future reclaimed water flows that could be used to replace groundwater withdrawals for uses such as irrigation. And the size of the pie chart on the map shows the relative magnitude of the total 2018 reclaimed water flow for each wastewater treatment facility and indicates the proportion of the flow that was utilized beneficially, and that's shown in purple. These are flows that offset or replace groundwater withdrawals or recharge the aquifer. In 2018, there were no facilities that had disposal. So that's why you're not going to see any orange on this map. And the district, in collaboration with the stakeholders in the region, identified a suite of project options with an estimated benefit that is potentially available to offset the majority of the projected increase in groundwater demand. This pie chart shows the breakout of project options, estimated benefit, and estimated current cost. As you'll see, water conservation projects, which are shown in green, make up the largest portion of the pie, and they are recognized as the lowest cost option in meeting future demand. The district continues to heavily invest in conservation efforts in North Florida through a variety of efforts, including outreach, training, partnerships, and through the district's cost share programs. So water supply development projects are projects which plan, design, construct, operate, or maintain facilities for water collection, production, treatment, transmission, or distribution for an end use. An example of this type of project would be the expansion of reclaimed water service into a new or existing development. There's one water supply development project option that was identified, which is the Wakasasa Water and Wastewater Cooperative. And it's a wellfield optimization project. This project is aimed at establishing a regional water and wastewater authority to address challenges associated with water supply, wastewater treatment or collection, and distribution systems for Cedar Creek, Otter Creek, Bronson, and unincorporated areas of Levy County. The initial water supply benefits are estimated at 0.03 million gallons per day. However, upon completion, there may be additional potential reclaimed water flow that may add to the estimated benefits. In addition, the regionalization also provides a variety of water quality benefits as well. The plan also contains water resource development projects that provide regional benefits and are typically implemented by water management districts or districts in conjunction with other agencies. Water resource development projects can increase the amount of water available for water supply, collect and analyze data for water supply planning, or study the benefits of new techniques. The plan identified 4 water resource development projects with a total capacity of 4.1 million gallons per day. Most of these projects are groundwater recharge projects that are related to the restoration of wetlands that could recharge the aquifer, as well as an ecosystem services project that could implement silvicultural management practices to reduce forest evapotranspiration, resulting in increased aquifer recharge. Water conservation projects include any action that reduces the demand for water, including those that prevent or reduce wasteful or unnecessary uses, and those that improve efficiency of use. The plan identified 10 water conservation projects with an estimated total of 8.94 million gallons per day of water saved. Both agricultural and public supply related conservation projects have been proposed, and the agricultural water conservation projects include the district's cost share programs, smart soakers for cattle cooling, and the use of soil moisture probes, pivot retrofits to reduce water use. On the public supply side, these water conservation projects include infrastructure replacement and advanced metering to reduce water loss. The 2024 plan also identifies a variety of funding sources that are available, including water supply and user funding options, water management district funding options, which include the district's cost share programs and the Water Resource Development Work Program, numerous state and federal funding options, and public-private partnerships, cooperatives, and other private investments. The 2024 Western Water Supply Plan concludes that fresh groundwater can supply some, but not all of the projected demand during the 20-year planning horizon without causing unacceptable impacts to water resources and the related natural systems. To meet current and future water demands, the plan identifies 4.1 million gallons per day of water resource and water supply development project options and 13 to 14 million gallons per day of water conservation measures. Therefore, the 2024 Western Water Supply Plan concludes that the future demands can be met through the 2045 planning horizon while sustaining water resources and the related natural system. Active participation from stakeholders in the Western Water Supply Plan region is vital to ensure that the plan reflects local needs. Throughout this collaborative process, we have been working with stakeholders, including utilities, local governments, and other interested parties to develop the population and water demand projections, conduct the water resource assessments, and identify alternatives to using groundwater. With the approval of a regional water supply plan, there is a legislative mandate for facilities work plans to be completed by the local governments and submitted to the Florida Department of Commerce within 18 months after plan approval. The facilities work plan must demonstrate sufficient water supply for at least the next 10 years. Water supply needs can be met with projects and/or conservation. In addition, local governments must amend their comprehensive plans to include water supply facilities work plans. With that, I am happy to answer any questions.
That was a lot of information. Yes, it was. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
What does the lack of use of 50 million gallons a day out of a paper mill do to your plan?
So it would affect the projections a little bit. In this plan, we held Foley's water use consistent throughout the planning horizon. We did do an analysis and rerun our NEFSEG model, removing their use completely from the model. And the water bodies in the Western Plan were not affected. Most of those effects that we were seeing were contained within the Fen-Holloway River Basin.
So is there any way that we can sell some of this 50 million gallons to some of these other areas that would be affected?
I would probably point to some of those.
A lot of pipes.
We do not currently have a submitted project of that nature.
'Cause we have an overabundance of water right now in our county. So you're telling me that the projections for 2045, if we take the 50 million gallons of use a day from Foley, that it's not gonna increase the amount of water that's available to those basins other than the Fen-Holloway? Is that what you're saying?
Based on the results of the modeling, that is correct.
Because it would seem to me that we might be able to save some money on not having to try to recoup some of that if we're not going to use it. Would you agree with that?
It depends on where the water is and where it needs to be.
Yep.
On your last slide, I think, let's see, the local governments, on the second, the work plan must demonstrate sufficient water supply. Do they get some of that information from us here at the district, or how do they go about getting that information?
Yes, so once the plan is approved, we will send entity notification letters, and they will be certified letters to any entity that has a project listed in the plan. And then we will be working with the North Florida Regional Planning Council to notify the local governments and work with them on updating their comprehensive plans.
Okay. Good deal. Any other questions?
I do, Madam Chair.
Yes, uh-huh.
Can you speak to the change in any of our systems in recovery?
I would either point to Amy or Sean to answer any changes.
Mr. Keith, which systems are you referring to?
Well, we have systems in recovery, but we seldom get any information on change. Is it up, down, or sideways?
For the Santa Fe River Basin?
Okay. Yeah, Eastern Tutney in particular.
We can bring that flow data back to you in terms of how the flows are trending. The system remains in recovery.
Yeah, it's still in recovery, but I'd like to see any change, taking in consideration population, rain, everything, but where is that recovery system going? Is it going up, down, or are we maintaining? So we have some form of timeline of urgency. It's a pretty serious designation when we call it recovery.
Yes, sir.
Maybe also an indicator on our projects and if they're working and.
Yeah, at least we could get some indication of what it's doing.
And how fast.
And how fast.
I tell you another thing that I'd like to see personally is, we're making projections, and Dr. Brown, you and I have discussed this several times about where the nest egg, models came from and how they were developed and everything else. I'd love to see not just are we gaining on water flow in these systems that we're putting these plans out, but I'd like to see, okay, did the population show up? Is the population trend going the direction of what the models are saying? I'd like to see, she showed a slide earlier about saltwater intrusion because of sea rise. I mean, 2045 is not that far away. And there's a lot of yellow on that map right there that we haven't seen. We haven't seen that in the last 50 years. Mm-hmm. You're telling me in, roughly 15 to 20 years, we're going to see that? I'd like to see that measurement. I'd like to see, okay, this is what we said it was going to be, and this is where we are. I mean, I won't be here in 15 years, hopefully. But I've been sitting here for almost 10. I'd like to see what these models really are saying. Because if you look at what we do on these models, we budget and we project how much we're going to spend on projects. And I know we have some real data because you're saying that we got some saltwater intrusion on one of the wells down there in Levy County. I'd like to see the results. I want to see, okay, this is what we said in 1990. Didn't they have these models, Dr. Brown, in 1990 or not?
Madam Chair, the models, the data that was available in 1990 to make plans and projections was not as robust as the data we have today. But we have done in the past, and we could certainly bring back to you what was being discussed and projected and what we see now relative to what was being discussed and projected in those prior plans. We've done some of that exercise in the past, but we haven't circled back to that in a recent time. And I think it is a useful exercise because I think in some places you can see that the projections were correct. In other places you can see where perhaps there was a little bit of exuberance that was not reflected in what actually happened on the ground. So we can certainly bring that information back to you. Just like everything, I mean, we wish we have, going far back in time, the quality of data that we have today. We don't, but we do have data, and we can certainly bring that back to the board.
I have one more question, too. What's kind of interesting to me is the only well, and it's a deep water well, that we've got saltwater intrusion in, is in a place where there's nobody living. There's not a lot of water withdrawal from there. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Mr. Schwab, that area is an area where and again, there may be a trend in sea level rise that is triggering that change in quality, but that area is also an area where there has been persistent low quality water for some length of time.
For a long time.
And that's some of the motivation for the pipeline project that is being proposed is to deal with some of the persistent water quality issues that exist in that corridor through time. So there is potential that sea level is exacerbating it, but that area specifically in our district is an area that has a legacy of low-quality water in that region.
Is that all the way down there at Cedar Key?
It's a Rosewood.
Rosewood area? Yeah. Interesting. I wonder, though, I mean, with the low-quality water down there, how long has that salt water been there? Has it always been there?
I would have to look at the data, but my understanding is that area has been low. And there are other parts of the state of Florida where you have areas where there is lower quality water because there is less resistance to intrusion from salt water.
Interesting.
So you have both a natural and then you have potentially some amplification of that.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
you also mentioned, talking about Levy County, you also mentioned the well was like 400 foot deep. Is that unusually deep for our monitoring well?
It is one of the deeper wells.
Yeah, I would say it's the deepest well that we assessed in this planning region.
And the reason would be?
Madam Chair, I can't speculate as to why it was constructed that deep at the time it was constructed. Certainly a part of our network that we've maintained, but the initial motivation for putting it in at that depth, I don't know.
Would it be an assumption that the depth of wells could indicate water intrusion?
Yes, sir. The deeper well increases the likelihood that you would see something there.
Madam Chair, if I could add as well, that's one of the things that we have recently worked, and I think Amy and certainly Susie can speak to this, but worked with the Department of Environmental Protection in enhancing our water quality monitoring network, particularly along our coastal basins area. DEP has provided some funding. We put in some additional wells to try to better delineate what that water quality looks like and over time.
All right, any other questions? Thank you very much. All right, you are up and special. This is agenda item number 26, and Susie Hedrick is going to present. The governing board will now hold a public hearing and approval of the 2024 Swanee River Basin Surface Water Improvement and Management Plan update. Susie, will you please provide the staff presentation and recommendation?
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'll present a few slides as background for staff's recommendation. The Swanee River Basin Swim Plan identifies priority water bodies within the Swanee River Basin and outlines strategies and specific projects aimed at improvement and protection of those water bodies. The legislative basis for swim plans in Florida comes from the 1987 Swim Act, which directed the water management districts to identify priority water bodies and develop plans for improving and managing them. In addition, Florida Administrative Code 62-43 specifies the elements a swim plan will contain, and those include descriptions of the priority water bodies, strategies for their restoration and protection, lists of active restoration projects, and funding needed to carry out those projects. The Swanee River Basin Swim Plan prioritizes the Swanee, Alapaha, Withlacoochee, Santa Fe, and Nichetucknee rivers shown on this swim plan area map. The district posted the draft swim plan update online in September 2023, and in October we requested agency, local government, and public review of the plan. Also at that time, we solicited potential swim projects to support the plan. And based on comments that we received, we revised the draft and held a public workshop here at the district on January 9th, 2024. We have received no additional comments for the plan. So at this time, we're bringing it back to the board and recommending the board's approval. Once we have a board-approved plan, the district will submit it to DEP for their final review. And once we have that, we will bring it back to the board for adoption. So with that, staff's recommendation is to approve the 2024 Swanee River Basin Surface Water Improvement and Management Plan update.
Any questions on the swim plan? There being none, is there a motion
Motion to approve.
and second?
Second.
We have a motion and second. All in favor,
Hold
say
on.
aye. Oh,
Robin.
Madam Chair, we need to ask for public comment.
I'm so sorry, you're right. At this time, we'll open the floor to public comment. There being none, we'll close the floor for public comment and move on to, we have a motion and a second. We'll do a vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. Motion carried. Thank you. Thank you, Robin.
Madam Chair, that concludes my items.
Thank you. We worked hard today, didn't we?
Have homework too, right?
Well, good morning, Madam Chair and board members.
Good morning.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning. And happy pre-Valentine's Day, everyone. I'd like Mr. Richard's tie. Right appropriate.
I'm a lover, not a fighter, brother.
I believe that about you, Mr. Richard. So we do have some workshops coming up, and I'll speak a little bit more about them in just a moment. Ben and Tyler are in Tallahassee, and they are continuing right now with the legislature. There are some budget conferences that are ongoing right now. The session currently is slated to end the 8th of March, and so we're keeping a close eye on that. And the conferences between the Senate and the House are very close from a budget settlement perspective, and so they're continuing to work with it. Also have some very good news. We received an inquiry from the Department of Management Services, and staff responded to that relative to an audit of our Florida Retirement Service. And they looked at the records. They came in and looked at the records, or we sent the records over to them from July through December of last year. And special appreciation goes out to Lisa Cheshire and our HR group, and also Kristen Thompson, and they were recognized in the follow-up letter. Madam Chair, you should have received a copy of this as well in there, and they expressed their appreciation for staff assistance with that. The objectives of that audit were to determine the accuracy of the reports that are submitted on behalf of the district to the Division of Retirement, and then the degree of compliance with the appropriate statutes and rules, and then the coverage agreements by our agency. And so with that, the outcomes of that audit came back in the summary, and it says that no concerns were noted from the audit. And if you all have seen several reports from auditors, that means that it was a good thing. The report went very well. So certainly appreciative of staff and working with them on it, and how that turned out overall. One of the things we want to plan on, making sure Robin doesn't have anything in her hands right now, but one of the things we're planning on is May timeframe, looking at having our board meeting here, and then doing an off-site tour of some of our areas. Some of those areas that are studied relative to the work that you've heard reports of from Sean relative to our sturgeon population in the Swanee, and some of the shoals that are one of the limiting factors for passage of the sturgeon. Provided the river conditions will allow for, we'll look at doing a tour after our board meeting in May, out to some of those areas around the Live Oak area here. So look forward to that as well. Mr. Richard, I remember you were talking about looking at some of the projections and what the realities of that information, those projections look like on there. And I do remember I was with the Department of Ag back in the 08, 09 timeframe. And we looked at doing projections relative to ag growth at that point, and water use primarily with there. And we made some projections. We underestimated at that point. And granted, similar to what Dr. Brown had mentioned, some of the models and the accuracy of those models, they have drastically improved to where we're at today with that. But we did underestimate some of that growth. So it does bear looking at that data going forward. And the FSED data helps that we can receive from the Department of Agriculture, helps to make those projections going forward relative to ag water use. And then certainly there's other sources of data for the other water users and other parts of the pie, the water pie with that. So we will get some of that information and bring back to the board. It always helps to revisit with that. Our workshops, we do have 2 workshops. I did mention that Bob and Mark Warren are here relative to the control release technology. And they'll be providing information on how those projects turned out for last year. One of the things I would like for the board to keep in mind, with that particular project, it was one that we, the district, collaboratively funded with the Department of Agriculture on there. We did a 50-50 split for some of the effort, and IFAS certainly was heavily involved, and you'll hear some of that on the sampling and field effort portion and data analysis associated with that work. But we have been approached by looking at continuing to do some additional work with that going forward and looking at the benefits. The Department of Ag is looking at collaborating again on there, possibly for a 3-year project in looking at that. So I'll be coming back to the board, not this meeting, but in the near future, coming back to the board to garner support if the board is in favor of doing that. Or if you have the discussions today, I can gather somewhat of a consensus that the board is supportive after they see the report today. We can work on moving that ahead as well. And then also Steve Schroeder has a report for us relative to a facilities update and what we're looking at going forward for facilities. So Madam Chair, that completes my report for this month. And if the board has any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer those.
Madam Chair?
Yes,
One question. Since we were talking about Ben, the consulting firm of Ben and Associates, do we have any information on whether we've been able to get added to the legislature on the insurance?
No, sir, I don't have an update on that. I had hoped to get one by today, Mr. Charles, but I do not have an update on that. But I will continue to gather that information. I'll certainly reach out to you and the other board members as well on a one-to-one basis.
Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
I see that becoming more and more of a problem. I'd like to get that in our toolbox.
Right, and I know that there have been discussions up within the legislature relative to agency participation in that. It certainly, of course, the session is still ongoing, so there hasn't been any finalized decisions yet with that.
If we're going to spend more money on it, I'd like to see the benefit to the employee other than third parties.
Yes, sir. I would as well with that.
Y'all aren't going to ask me anything else? Come on.
I'm letting him off kind of easy.
Thank you, Hugh.
I appreciate that.
Yes, sir. I guess that's, we don't have any other questions. We
Okay.
appreciate everything. The ship's running good, and we appreciate you at the helm.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That concludes my report.
All righty. Okay, I think that will wind up our board meeting. We'll probably need to take a break, conclude this meeting, and then,
If I can take a 30-minute break, we can, or you can go straight through, however you prefer.
all right, it's a little early for our, okay. All right, so let's go ahead and conclude our board meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Make that motion, Madam Chair.
A second? We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. Motion carried. So if we need to probably then just move right on into our workshop. And the first item is a nutrient efficiency demonstration. Yes.
They're ready to go.
Podium, but appreciate them being here today. I saw Mark give this presentation back in December, I guess it was at the watermelons down in Phoenix Springs. I thought it would be very beneficial for the board to see the work that we're collaborating with the Department of Ag on and also with the university. And kudos are in order for Bob and Mark and IFAS team, Extension Service. You'll hear there's a lot of work that went into this study. Trying to do a comprehensive evaluation of the pros and cons of this type of fertilizer management technology. And I will tell you, takeaway, hopefully you have the same observation on it. The takeaway that I saw is that it still comes down to irrigation management relative to nitrate nitrogen because of the solubility of it. And that has to go hand in hand with the fertilizer management as well. I'll turn it over to you guys. Thank y'all for being here today.
Thank you, Hugh. Madam Chairman and board members, we're really happy to be able to have the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about this project. The investment that you all made in this project last year was quite important. And I'm going to start off, we're going to share the podium here a little bit on how we're going to go about presenting this. The first part that I would like to sort of recognize is that this was a whole team approach. There's a lot of watermelons in Levy County, and that's why Mark Warren is here. In fact, it's the number one county in the state in terms of watermelon production. And this region has at least a third of all of the watermelons produced in the state. So it's a really important crop and commodity in this region. And I have a feeling that this year, with the increase in acreage, it could be maybe pushing a lot more than just a third of the acreage in the state. Certainly one of the last concentrated areas of watermelon production in this region. The project itself had both watermelons and corn as part of it. The majority of the collaborative effort was with watermelon growers, but at the very end, I don't want to leave the corn part out, and we'll show you what happened there. As was mentioned, the funding was split between the district and the Office of Ag Water Policy to come up with $100,000. The funding part of it was managed here at the district with Jonathan Crane doing a really good job of helping us to be able to put all that together. Myself and the county agents were more the people working directly with the farmers, helping them to implement the program, and also basically making weekly visits to the farms. And the way the program was set up is that we were not cost sharing on fertilizer. We were cost sharing on the technology that went along with that fertilizer. So it's an expensive technology and there is additional cost, but the program, the pilot program, was built around this $300 an acre incentive for folks to participate with us. Part of that was for the additional polymer coating part of the fertilizer, the technology piece, and then there's another $50 an acre, sort of a collaboration fee, because we become a little bit of a pain. We're there every week and we have demands on the farmers and we want to be able to respect that. So each farmer made a decision when they decided that they were going to participate as to how they were going to participate, what they were looking for in the way that they wanted to utilize controlled release fertilizer. When I look at the overall plan, watermelon best management practice options, we do have a little bit of work to do in this particular crop. But we do have some advantages with watermelons because we have plastic mulch covering the bed and drip irrigation. So we got some things going for us that we can really fine tune and manage the ability to reduce leaching of nitrogen fertilizers. But these are the three options that I feel like to make improvements, this is where we need to be. We've been working over the last 10 years or so in number one, which is to reduce the bed nitrogen fertilizer. So prior to laying that plastic mulch over the bed, there's fertilizer that goes down in that conventional fertilizer that's vulnerable and soluble and are vulnerable to leaching because of its solubility. And then later in the season, we would be able to inject fertilizer into the drip irrigation system. Later when we do the fertigations, there's not a lot of risk of leaching at that point in time. We've got a big crop, a lot of root system there. We're not as much concerned about that, but we are concerned about this time of year at where we are right now in relation to that fertilizer under the bed being vulnerable to being lost. So the number 2 option is, can we use polymer-coated fertilizers or other technology that would reduce the leaching losses of nitrogen and potassium? In this area, of course, nitrogen is a main one that we're working to reduce, although potassium is also soluble and vulnerable to being leaching, but is not as much of an environmental impact as the nitrogen is. The third one, which came from our close relationship with the Florida Watermelon Association, is, all right, well, Bob and Mark, if that polymer-coated fertilizer is really expensive, can we just start with no nitrogen in the bed and feed the crop through the liquid fertigations for the entire season? So we had another project that was done at the Research Center this past year addressing number 3. But for today, our project here is going to be talking about number 2. So when we met with the farmers who thought maybe they would be interested in this, there was a lot of discussion about how we would go about doing this, whether they would in fact be interested in participating or not. The first point here is probably a whole hour lecture or discussion about how the polymer coating of the fertilizer works. But if you think about a granule, and I'll use an example of a granule of urea, it has to be a pretty high quality urea granule. It can't be a jagged edge. It's got to be a high quality, which makes it a little bit more expensive because the coating has got to go around a relatively smooth and round granule. And so the first thing that they do is to put the polymer coating around that granule. And I'll just use this as an example to depict how this works. When you put that polymer coating around it, I think of it as a leaky coating that has the ability for the fertilizer inside, once it becomes solubilized, to leak out of that coating. And that might last, 80% of it would be gone in, say, 30 or 40 days. All right? So for watermelons, we need more length of time than that. So there would be the ability to put a second coating on that fertilizer. Now we go from 30 or 40 days to maybe 50 or 60 days. If we need some of it to last 90 days, then there'll be a third coating. So they put the individual granules back through the system and coat it 1, 2, 3, 4 times to be able to get that longevity of our material. So in the case of watermelons, for example, we need a little bit at the beginning, a little bit in the middle, and a little bit at the end. So when we talk about controlled release fertilizers, it's similar to other fertilizers where it's going to be a blend of those different materials. It's not one size necessarily fits all. So this was a big challenge for us because there was some pushback about the fact that this is not going to work. We need, the farmers were being told that they needed fertilizer to, at the beginning of the season or end of the season, this controlled release fertilizer would not do that, but that's wrong. So anyway, we needed to make sure that everybody understood about this polymer coating and how it works. Our primary goal was to avoid early season leaching losses of nitrogen, this bed fertilizer, and then there is also some savings. If they don't need to fertigate through the drip system, then there's some labor and time savings there. Can you put this material down and not have to fertigate at all? You don't have to have a trailer of liquid fertilizer coming. You don't have to have another person to be able to do that. So there's some savings there as well. And that sort of counteracts the higher cost, or can counteract part of the higher cost of the fertilizer itself. It certainly is a lot easier for the farmers. There's a lot less decision making that needs to be done. And with the reduction in labor, it is really a benefit because it's getting harder and harder and harder for farmers to find labor to do this kind of technical activity, especially on the large acreage. And ultimately, our objective is to be able to use this technology to reduce the leaching in that early part of the season in particular. So after this project was done, we had an opportunity to sit down with all the farmers and interview them. Mark and an intern student was able to sit with, they were both able to sit down with the farmers and ask questions. We got a really good bunch of feedback about how that worked for them. We also met with the fertilizer companies that were the distributors of this. There were 2 main companies that supplied material. And then in the end, we had a 2-hour meeting with every farmer and went through a lot of what you're going to see here just in a moment with Mark. This slide, to me, is one of the most important and visible slides. So if there's nothing else that you remember, this slide will help to point to what it is that we're trying to do, what is it that we're trying to fix. So this is, these lines are from a soil moisture sensor. And the soil moisture sensor not only measures the soil moisture, but also measures electrical conductivity, which is an indirect measure of the fertilizer in the bed. All right. So all of these lines are different depths of sensors, and we have sensors in this particular case 4, 8, 12, 16, and 20 inches. And if you look at the left-hand side of the graph, that's the beginning of the season as soon as the plastic mulch was laid, but there's no crop there yet. In fact, the irrigation has not even been hooked up yet, all the way over on the left-hand axis. And you'll notice that there were high levels of fertilizer on the black, yellow, and red lines, for instance. And then once the irrigation was hooked up, this is soluble fertilizer. This is not controlled release fertilizer. This is soluble fertilizer. Once the irrigation was hooked up, flushed, trying to get the beds wetted, we began to see significant movement of some type of soluble fertilizer. We don't know if it's nitrogen or what percentage is nitrogen or potassium, but we do know that those are the two that are put down in the bed in the highest quantity, so it's probably a combination of both of them. And you'll see early in the season, for the first couple of days, with that excessive irrigation, back to Hugh's point, that we begin to move the concentration of fertilizer down. So there's only one line in there, if you notice the blue line, that actually increases and maintains itself at the highest level from that point on. That's the darker blue line, right? That's the 20-inch line. So this particular data shows that we moved the fertilizer down to at least 20 inches. We could have moved it further than that, but our deepest sensor was only 20 inches. And so this is what we're trying to fix. And how do we fix it? We can fix it by having less vulnerable fertilizer through polymer coating, or to eliminate the fertilizer entirely in the bed and only do it through fertigation events. One of the other good fortunes that we had in this project was that we decided that we wanted to use 48-inch depth sensors. So this would have leave some questions in the farmer's mind. Well, that's all the further it went. It went to 20 inches and that was it. But you're going to see in here momentarily that the 48-inch sensors really allowed us to be able to hone in on the message to the farmers with very visible data as to what happened on their particular farm. So anyway, this slide is really, it depicts what we're trying to do. If you notice one final point on this, and then I'll turn it over to Mark, is that on the left-hand side is when the plastic was laid and they started irrigation. They have not planted yet until they get over on the right-hand side. So there's no crop. When all this is going on, there's no crop been planted yet. It takes time to get everything ready, get past bad weather events, and then plant. So it's a 2-week period there when all of this activity was going on. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark, who worked directly with the farmers on this, and have him give that review.
Make sure I understand this tool. Oh, yeah. I too appreciate the opportunity just to come and speak to you. And I think, you can just about end with what Bob just said and get the full picture of what's going on and what we're trying to work towards. But the 48-inch probes did give us a lot. There's a lot of data here. I love looking at data. I love looking at charts, but I hate sitting in an audience looking at them, especially when there's a lot of new information and trying to catch it quick enough. Just going to try to hit some of the high points, and hopefully it'll help you kind of get a picture. So we had, as Bob had already mentioned, 7 different watermelon cooperating farms that we did these projects on. Rather than drilling down in all 7 of those, I've just pulled 2 out as an example. And we're just going to look at those in a little more detail. And we're going to drill down into them, maybe even more than what you want to, just to be real honest. But anyhow, as Bob mentioned, there were 2 different fertilizer providers, Purcell and Harrell's. We're not trying to pick on one or the other, but they perform differently, and I think it's worth mentioning. We're also, in looking at these 2 producers, there's one who opted for a full season treatment, so he's putting all of his controlled release fertilizer in the bed prior to planting with expectations that it was carrying through the entire production season. In comparison to that, we had another producer who, in addition to his conventional product, also had a bed replacement, which was a short season. He's basically replacing that bed fertilizer that Bob was talking about that's traditionally put under the plastic with the plans to inject liquid fertilizer during that period of the season when leaching losses are less of a concern. And he also ran a side-by-side full season product. So Again, this was really a great opportunity on a single farm to see conventional, bed replacement, and a full season product all in comparison to each other, similar soil, same varieties, and look at what happened. So a couple of things just on this table, and I'm not going to spend too much time there. With this Purcell product, and again, I'm not trying to pick on them, they were, as Bob said, we've learned a lot and are continuing to learn. That coating that he was talking about, Purcell kind of hedged on the early side, thinking that we needed more soluble in the front end of that system. And so they designed a product that released earlier than what the Harolds did, to the point where they actually started running out. And you'll see this in later graphs, but what I want you to notice here is full season controlled release actually had higher nitrogen applications than what his conventional did. And you look at that and you think, why is that? Well, it was because they actually ran out of fertilizer mid-season and had to start injecting to be able to meet the crop requirements. And you can see in that example that the conventional outperformed. So these are total yields, pounds per acre, and the conventional outperformed. That's okay, we'll drill down just a little bit more in that. And then in this other one, fairly comparable nitrogen applications. Interesting to see that his highest yields actually were in this partial season, which was his lowest nitrogen application. So again, so here's where your eyes start glazing over because I'm showing all these charts and graphs, but just to kind of give you an idea of what all is being represented here. This top table is that 48-inch soil moisture probe that Bob spoke about. So we have sensors every 4 inches, starting at 2, working all the way down to 46 inches actually. The red arrows that you see were actually recorded rainfall events at a fawn weather station. May or may not have been what happened on that specific farm. We just went to the nearest weather station that UF maintains and used that to kind of represent the data. And so these blue stars that you see along here, keep in mind that this graph we're looking at is on his conventional fertilizer. But these blue stars would be liquid applications, injections that were actually made during the course of the season. Some of the stuff just worth looking at. A lot of our producers, and this is producer one, a lot of our producers like to get their bed wet early in the season. This may be due to frost. It may be due to the fact that they pulled a dry bed up and they need to get some water there before, when they first get that crop in. Again, thinking about what Bob spoke about in that 20-inch probe, all that fertility being down at that 20-inch level, where are those root plants to start with during that first part of that season? Just in the top couple of inches. So fertilizer's washed out to 20 inches, but we also sometimes have really heavy irrigation. So with this producer, he was probably over irrigating at this point, trying to keep his plants alive. Could have done it with less, but he was maintaining kind of a high water table. Keep in mind, each of these, gotta get down where I don't shake so bad, each of these lines would represent movement at different depths. Well, because he was so wet here, he got this rain event, and as you can see, it bumped the water table all the way down to this 46-inch mark. We'd like to see that bottom line just stay flat, maybe even the bottom couple of lines stay flat. We don't have any reason to be manipulating water that deeply, especially if we have a soluble fertilizer, because if we're manipulating water down at those depths and we have fertilizer solubilized, odds are we're pushing fertilizer down, as that earlier graph showed you. So producer was really super wet here after this rain event. You can see he touched all the way down, but then he starts straightening out. By the way, Bob was a little humble. He mentioned weekly aggravations from our crew going out and taking petiole sap test samples and soil samples. Bob was also calling them sometimes 2 and 3 times a week just to let them know what he was seeing on their soil moisture probes. So he was a total thorn in their side throughout the process. But a great educational opportunity as he was working with producers to start utilizing these tools. I don't know, I wanted to get off on a rabbit trail there, but I won't. Anyhow, as we look across here, you can see this producer actually started getting a little nervous in here. He was listening to Bob all through this, and you can see pretty nice flat lines down here. Matter of fact, a little bit of loss as that crop matured and was uptaking more water. We were getting a little bit of reduction. But he started getting nervous and he started jacking up his irrigation. So he started getting excessively wet, and you're going to see where this makes sense here in a second when I explain this. But again, rain events, on and on. So, I mean, you can see what's happening. This was probably a rain event that didn't record on a fawn weather station, I'm suspecting. Or he could have forgotten and left his irrigation on, I don't know. But something happened here, obviously, that hit all the way down low. So now take this and thinking about what was going on with the water and looking at this next graph, Bob mentioned the EC. It actually records in volumetric ion content, which is what that VIC is. And similar to that other graph that Bob showed you earlier, we just blocked out some of this because there'd be so many lines on here if I had all of the sensors lit up. We just picked 10, 18, 30, and 46 just to make it easier to look at. So kind of what we would expect. Up in the top side, we had pretty good activity initially, good management, got this big rain event. And if you look, this is that 46-inch mark, conventional fertilizer, solubilized. All of a sudden, when we got that big rain event, where'd all this fertilizer go? Flushed out the bottom early in the season. I mean, this is March 14th, 15th, somewhere in there. Then we see these upper levels, the 10 and 18, start picking up. Well, why do you think that might have happened? He started injecting fertilizer up here, so you would kind of expect that to happen. So he starts getting these upper levels, and he's doing pretty good. He's maintaining his fertilizer up in the top of his profile. There's a little bit of accumulation down here, probably from this event. But everything was going real well till he got to this point and he got nervous and he started jacking his irrigation rate up. And all of a sudden, what starts happening at 46 inches, again, he's putting an injection out every now and then, so we get these little peaks. But ultimately, he's washing his fertilizer down into this 46-inch range. That's what's happening with conventional fertilizer. How does it compare to what happened in the CRF? Same farm, same irrigation. The only difference is he's not injecting fertilizer on this side until later. This is that Purcell product that I said ran out of gas partway through the season. He did have to start injecting, and that was why his nitrogen rates went higher than what IFAS recommendations would have been. But again, worked really well. I mean, he over-irrigated a little up here, and Hugh mentioned earlier, one of the things that we really learned out of this is that regardless of whether you're using soluble fertilizer or controlled release fertilizer, irrigation management still ends up being the key factor in how we maintain these nutrients up in that level where the plants need them. So he's doing real good. Good nutrient levels, keeping up in these upper levels. Not much happening down here. Real excited. All of that works all the way across to, again, where he started getting nervous with his irrigation and started jacking his irrigation up, and look what happens, especially when we combine that with some rain events. But still, and again, he started injecting here as well. So a couple of different things going on, but just graphic representation of what we're able to learn and see utilizing this BMP technology in combination with the other technology being that polymer coating on the fertilizer. Just to help the farmers keep up, this is something we're doing right now on, I don't know how many farms across the Suwannee Valley, but agents all across the Suwannee Valley have meters that they can go out and test sap levels. So they're pulling petiole samples off of plants weekly, and we use this to measure the nitrogen and potassium content in the plant tissue, trying to help that farmer tweak and optimize his nutrient utilization. So the orange line here is conventional fertilizer, the blue line is the controlled release, and this gray line is the average recommendation. So this is where research has told us that these plants ought to be at different stages of growth. So a little high up front, but running kind of parallel. I think the bottom line of this part of this story, and whether we're looking, and one of these is nitrogen and the other is potassium. What I think this tells me is that whether we're using controlled release fertilizer or soluble, we can meet the plant needs with either one. There was some concern early on that there may be periods where those plants are growing, that the control release might not release fast enough to meet crop requirements, and this just tells us that it was. This is a critical part. As I mentioned in this producer one, we started running out of gas at one point, and he needed to be able to inject. We were able to go in and salvage that, and because of these plant sap tests that we were taking weekly. Don't need to go into this too much, but this just shows where the different fertilizer came from, and this would be as full season control release versus conventional. As I mentioned, he put it down in the bed with hopes of it all being there for the entire season. It played out early. He ended up having to add liquid fertilizer to be able to meet the crop needs, and ended up busting his budget basically. But it's all part of the learning process. Did I skip too far? No, I'm good. Okay, sorry. This was just looking at that same producer, and we were looking at yields for each different week. By the way, that's another part of what's not told in this story. So typically our IFAS recommendations for a watermelon season for nitrogen are about 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre. That's considering a conventional season that might run 3 or 4 different harvests. Some of our producers this past year had 7, 8 plus harvests. So there are times, because of things going on elsewhere, like Georgia market was not able to meet the demand, that our farmers might have to extend their production season a little bit, in which case the 150 might not be sufficient to carry them through that extended season. But yields, I guess that's to make sure that we kind of point that out. Yields were fairly comparable, a couple of thousand pounds less. That's important to the farmer, but keep in mind that these projects weren't replicated, so we really don't know what the statistical significance or difference might be. It could have flip-flopped the other way, but we think that's comparable is what that is. Don't know that there's any statistical or would be any statistical difference between those two yields. Producer 5, so this is the gentleman that had the 3 different treatments, conventional, 45-day, and the full season. This is his conventional fertilizer. So again, this guy has an automated irrigation system, so he's doing a really good job managing his irrigation, utilizing soil moisture sensors and making those decisions. That automation allows him some flexibility to be a little more responsive to what he's seeing happening on these probes, and I think provides for a lot more efficient use of water resources. And because of that, he can manage his nutrients a lot better as well. But this would be as conventional. A couple of rain events bumped it, but other than that, you just see excellent water management from this guy, this producer, other than the couple of rain events that may have bumped it in some places. Because of his great management, we see his fertilizer holding pretty consistently. That's what we'd want to see. Most of the nutrient concentration being in those upper levels. By the way, these watermelon roots, most of the root mass is within 80% of the root mass is in the top 20 inches during peak production. So that's where we'd like to see us keep those. Little bump here down deep, but that was probably tied to these rain events where we see a pretty heavy hit. I'm trying to hurry. Am I taking too long, Bob? Bob will get on to you. Oh, yes, sir. It does get away from us a little bit, either due to irrigation or probably more to these rain events that have triggered that. All right, so this is his control release fertilizer. He's a bed replacement, so his goal with this was just to meet the 45-day requirement, replacing that bed fertilizer. He does have some injection going on. Remember, that's the blue stars here. But anyhow, excellent, again, water management, so he's not bumping. Matter of fact, if you look, most of these lines that are below 30 inches really don't move a whole lot in the course of the whole season, so really good management. And with that also, with his controlled release, was really super able, and I guess that's what Bob's point was on that previous slide. The nitrogen in the controlled release fertilizer is just as leachable as what the nitrogen in a soluble fertilizer is, conventional fertilizer. The difference is that a percentage of it is protected in that polymer coating. So in the event where we have a heavy rain event or over irrigation, we leach out whatever has become available in that environment at that time. But we still have the bulk of it protected under the shelter of that polymer coating. So when we have a rain event, we wash all that nitrogen out in a soluble conventional fertilizer, but with the control release fertilizer, we're able to protect it and maintain it there. We wash off that small fraction that's available, and that's why we don't see the bumps associated with the rain events and heavy irrigation down deep. As we had seen in the previous slide, these maintain and hold steady very well. Again, using the SAP test to help them make sure that they're staying on track, make adjustments if we need to. I think it's a great BMP practice, and we're doing this on a lot of farms through all the counties throughout the district. His different fertilizer uses, I don't know that there's a whole lot I want to drill down deep here. His full season, he put 154 in the bed, had to come back with just a little bit of a hit of nitrogen. At one point, his plants just kind of lagged a little bit, and this seemed to be that jump start they needed to push them on and help him finish out the season. Again, this is the producer where his 45-day was his lowest nitrogen application. He ended up using quite a bit more in his conventional. But here's kind of the bottom line. This was what all the farmers were excited about. Not this one, it'll be the next slide, and I'll be done. Anyhow, great harvest. One of the things that we do think we're seeing some are bigger yields early with the controlled release fertilizer. Don't know that we know exactly why that's happening. Maybe it's kind of the subclinical dosing that's going on, where normally with liquid, we would have this high and low where plants feast and famine, where they had plenty and didn't have enough, where with this control release, it's a little more consistent. Maybe we're getting a little better production resulting from that more even feeding. And then this was all 7 producers, and I just think it's kind of interesting to look at these different yield numbers. This was that producer 1 that we looked at, slightly different, but probably not significant. Keep in mind, again, that's all I want to, and we talked to the farmers about this as well, as Bob mentioned when we interviewed them individually, and we found out some stuff. This farmer right here, I know who it was, ended up as conventional, had almost 90,000 pounds to the acre, where his CRF had 80,000. His CRF was this Purcell product that ran out a little early, but he even volunteered in this, that the end of the field that yielded higher has always been a better performing part of the field for him. So again, since this wasn't replicated and couldn't really do statistical analysis, there are some explanations for some of this that the farmers actually conceded and provided for us. But anyhow, as you look across the numbers, not a lot of statistical difference between, at least between the Harold's product and the conventional system, which tells us that, yes, with controlled release fertilizer, we can still grow a watermelon crop successfully with a reduced risk of leaching and hopefully a more responsible use of our resources.
Thank you, Mark. And the number that Mark was referring to on the SAP testing, there's 100 farms that some of us are on every week, and Mark has the lion's share of that. I think the summary that I would bring here with all these numbers sort of boiled down is that we have the ability to get very high yields with controlled release fertilizer, and in some cases higher yields as long as we manage the irrigation properly. The other thing that I'll give a plug here for the fact that Harold's is the one that we did the research on for 4 years at the research center before we took this to the farms. Purcell had done very little. They were not as willing to invest in research as Harold's was. So when we went to the field, guess what? Harold's was ready to go. They knew what worked. Purcell had to figure it out, and they made a strategical error in trying to put too much of it on the front end, and that's why theirs failed. They know exactly how to fix that because of this project. So this coming year, I'm confident that these will all be the same. And if we can manage the irrigation properly, I think that we'll be able to actually utilize this technology to be able to help reduce that early season leaching. I won't go through all of these. I think we've kind of hit on these as we've gone through. To me, the main thing is I believe that this technology can really help us to be able to reduce that early season nitrogen leaching. And in particular, our work in watermelons. We're also working on potatoes, snap beans, corn, sweet corn. We've had some really good successes with this kind of technology, but it is more expensive. And so when you take the first years when we were doing the small plot research at the center, you can learn a lot, and it helps us to feel confident that we're ready to go to the field. But you cannot learn what you need to learn at small plots at the research center. You have to get on farm to be able to do that. And so that if I were to say an encouragement with this proposed 3-year project coming up, I think it's going to be absolutely critical for us to be able to continue to work with these farmers and learn from them how to be able to refine that particular this particular program. So we're standing ready to go. If that funding does come through, we'll continue to do our work on the IFAS side of things to make sure that all of that works. The final point here is that with irrigation management, the soil moisture sensors really provided us a lot of insight. In particular, the 48-inch sensors were really, really important. Now, where do we go with this? I'm trying to figure out how to have a drip irrigation watermelon club. Something, because it's partly about this fertilizer, but now we need to go back and dig in to help them to learn how to change their irrigation practices, or else neither of these controlled release nor conventional are going to work. All right, I mentioned that there was corn. There's only one slide, I promise, on this. There's 3 farms that we worked with. Two of them were grain corn. One was a silage corn grower. There was also Harrell's and Purcell involved in these projects as well, mostly down in the Gilchrist and Levy County area. And there were different application methods to try to figure out with that farmer how they wanted to be able to utilize it. The top left bars on that particular graph show that we actually did better with the controlled release, put out 2 different ways than we did on the conventional. On the silage corn, pushing 30 tons on the controlled release and pushing 25 tons on the conventional. So that was a winner proposition there. The one below that was probably, again, the polymer coating issue where the company, this was a Purcell material, and it ran out too fast. So that's the problem that we've got to be able to fix, and we can only learn how to do that by going on farm. The other one on the upper right-hand side was a slight benefit to the controlled release. So 2 of the 3, the controlled release worked better on those farms. So Harrell's has definitely got a leg up, although Purcell, there's no secrets between the 2 of them. They both understand what each other are doing, and so I'm confident that both of them can fix this up. We do greatly appreciate the opportunity to have this project so we can keep the momentum going. Without the cost share right now, and I'll call it cost share, that's not really the right term, but without this special project, I think it's really difficult to keep the momentum going. And so that's why I feel like these projects are super important for us to be able to take these things on the farm, learn how to do it, and we gain a lot of improvement with a relatively small investment on these farms. So anyway, we really appreciate the opportunity to present this, and we're open for questions if there are any.
Was excellent information, and it's really a good project. Not only in the fertilizer, but in also the irrigation effects. Does anybody have any questions for these gentlemen?
Madam Chair,
Good work.
just some comments. I mean, so I'm very familiar with the silage project, been involved with it for multiple years. We've seen the data in the trials and then this on-farm demonstration, and it's just an exciting technology. It's certainly in need of development for the right application. We've seen a lot of varying results, but nothing that crosses it off the list, and anything that we can do to help provide nutrients in the right place at the right time that don't get away from the plants, that has a benefit across the board. And I like how you're looking at, how do we invest these nutrients to produce a certain quantity of yield? Ultimately, that's what it takes, right? We're out there growing yield for the market. So if we can do that on less acres, that's a benefit as well.
Thank you.
I was going to ask a question. What's the plant spacing on the watermelons?
It varies, but on average, we typically have about 10 feet between beds of plastic, and then down the row would be approximately 2 feet between plants, something like that. They range. Some growers are wider spacing on 12 feet between beds, and maybe then down 18 inches down the row. But I would say if you take all that and average, it's going to be probably a 10-foot bed spacing and about 2 feet down the row.
'Cause I'm 45 years out of 100 acres of watermelons, and we were 10 feet by 36 inches where we did it back then. But of course, we poured a lot in the ground to start with and didn't have plastic. And but this technology is really going to help save a lot of fertilizer.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I mean, I don't want this to seem self-serving. I just don't know where else to go. Like with this technology, it seems to me, especially in this particular plasticulture system, that it's the main place that we got to go. Just one other quick thing: to get this yield, we had to count buses coming out of the field. So when you see watermelon buses in and out, and they might say, Johnny might say, "Hey, Bob, I thought it was going to be next Tuesday, but I'm going to go to that field right now." And so somebody had to get to that field right now.
They weren't at the scales to...
No, we would take one bus and get an average, and then count the number of buses in and out from this part and that part. And initially, when we agreed to do this, we thought, well, that's not going to be too bad. There's maybe 3, maybe 4 harvests. And then this year, we had to be there for 8 harvests, 9 harvests. It was incredible. Wow. So anyway, the team of us really worked hard for that. And I say that because we gained a lot of respect from the farmers from doing that, because we were committed to what they needed from us so that we didn't lose any data. We lost no data. And 2 farms did take it over, every bus over the scales, and recorded that for us. But otherwise, all the other farms, we had to be there, whether it was Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Saturday, it didn't matter. We had to be there. So anyway. Any other questions?
Do you see the economic viability with this right here, with the extra increase of price of fertilizer to make it where it's sustainable for the farmers to do that?
I do, and I'll use an example that there's, out of the 7 farms, 4 of them are planning on doing this again this year. I already planned to committed to do it again this year, and maybe not on 100% of the acreage. So I think the trade-off is, when you look at the big picture, can they get a little bit of an increase in yield, and can they use less fertilizer with good irrigation management practices? And then the biggie, can they reduce their labor force because they don't have to do any of this other injection stuff during the course of the season? Put it all down in the bed, no fertigations, no trailer, liquid fertilizer coming. So if it's not one factor, but you put all of those things together, that's where they perceive the
Starts balancing it out.
Yeah.
Cool.
Probably $250 an acre is gonna be sort of that point. And they've said, Bob, I don't have to get to break even on this between the two. I'm willing to invest $50 an acre, more, if I don't have to find labor. And labor is really, I don't have to tell any of you that, it's really difficult. And you're asking somebody to turn valves on and off, and, it's not just for any Joe. And if you got 600 acres and you got people running around all over the place doing that, that's the part that, the answer to your question, emphatically from me, yes, they will be able to do that.
How do they go from average of 4 harvests to a field to 8 and 10? Do they just keep putting the fertilizer to it and let them keep doing what they do, or what?
Yeah, and typically, if you were going to extend it every week, which in the best management practice thing, if you extend the season and you've got tissue samples, sap samples that justify to go above the 150 pounds per acre, you can do that and still be within compliance with the BMP. How would they do it with drip irrigation? They would continue to do fertigation events. But in many cases, like the full season controlled release, they never had to add any more. There was still enough there that was feeding.
They kept harvesting.
Yeah.
That's where you really gained right there.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
So you wish bad juju on those guys in Georgia so you can keep on going. You pray against your brothers in Georgia.
100%.
Dang, man.
There's juju to the south too. So if they give us an opening on the beginning of the season, and Georgia gave us an opening on the end of the season, there was no other place for them to go. And that we had a corner on the market, and the growers themselves, the best watermelon price year ever in the history of this region last year.
Do they find that those extra harvests, do the melons taste any different?
Well, I don't know that there's much difference in taste, but they get smaller and smaller. And I'm not saying that they were really super proud of the 8th and 9th harvest.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But they were super proud that the buyer wanted them because that's the only option there was. So you get past 3 or 4 harvests and the quality, there's no
All the
question.
melons go down. Yeah.
If that's the only market in town and they're still willing to pay 30 cents a pound for.
Yeah, come on. Let's go.
Yes, uh-huh.
Can I just mention that you have to haul those through Georgia to get them to the rest?
Listen, you may beat our eyes out in football, but we'd buy
Stop them in the scales and turn them around.
You have to be careful. There might be some tariffs coming up. I had one question, and I know the soil moisture probes are watching the water, but when you have really sandy soil or not so sandy soil, does that change the way we look at the results that you're getting?
Yes, the question about the different soil types, if you have a sandier soil, it's going to move down through the profile more quickly because there's not as much water holding capacity in that profile. So the sponge is a little thicker in a heavier soil than it is in a light soil. But the sensors are equally as accurate. Like, they're giving us really good information. It's just that it's much more difficult to hold that water in the top 15 or 20 inches in sandy soil than it is in a little bit heavier soil, just because there's that much more water holding capacity.
Madam Chair, if I may add, again, I appreciate Bob and Mark coming up and doing the presentation. Appreciate the work that they have done. And when you think about, you saw the numbers relative to watermelon, and Certainly, that is a large crop for our area. But when you think about, what gets me excited about it, when you think about the corn and the silage corn and the numbers that we're seeing with that, and helping that move the needle towards achieving the water quality goals that we have for our springs and rivers in this area. It's a light at the tunnel. I'm not going to say at the end of the tunnel, but it's a light in the tunnel so that it provides one more tool in the toolbox that we have from a technology standpoint to be able to help sustain agriculture in our district. And so with that, I don't know what the consensus of the board is. I'm not going to ask for a vote on this, but it seems like the board is generally supportive of this type of work in moving ahead with it. So with that, I'll be following up with Bob and also the Department of Agriculture based on what I'm hearing today.
I think you can count on it being, we're very supportive of this
Yep.
project.
Good with it.
Absolutely.
I will ask the question, since he brought up Georgia. Certainly, the University of Georgia is doing similar research, are they not?
Probably not.
Yeah. I'm going to say, I would say that there is a little bit. However, I was invited to come up to the Georgia Watermelon Growers Association meeting 2 weeks ago at St. Simon's Island, and it was clearly new territory for them. They have a whole different production system. They're not as much drip irrigation. There's a lot of small beds with overhead irrigation, so forth and so on. So I think that after that meeting, there will be some continuation. We're willing to work with them to try to help learn how to do the technology with my counterparts in Extension in Georgia and try to help them, because if it helps them, it helps us as well.
For a small fee.
Yeah. So this particular kind of work, I think, is emphasized here because it's clear that we have an urgent situation here that we got to fix, whereas maybe not perceived to be quite as urgent in the watermelon production area in Georgia would be my main perspective on that.
The good thing about it, I think, Mr. Richards, to that point is that, I mean, you heard Bob talking about producers willing to implement more of this on their farm because they see the practicality of moving towards this type of technology, the implementation of it. And that's going to help them be sustainable into the future, and that's what agriculture and other businesses are having to do.
Well, it's purely the labor issue, because every time you touch something in that field or you touch something in the woods, your costs go up exponentially.
Absolutely.
So if you can do it, and like what you're saying is just one touch and it's done. It makes it simple.
Yes, sir.
And the liquid fertilizer that they have to fertigate with is not cheap either. So it's a real advantage for lots of them. Back to the question of,
And we're seeing worldwide right now, issues in farming in Europe and other places where they're limiting the fertilizer nationally, and it's becoming a big issue. So if we can get ahead of the curve on doing this slow release technology and showing that we are able to do more with less and a whole bunch of other stuff, I think we could be way ahead of the curve.
the small plots at the center start, and when we see all y'all at the CARES event in May, that's where things start. But we know that what I like to think of is I get it confidence enough, 3 or 4 years of research, and that now I'm willing to put myself on the line out with the farmers. But I'm not going to do that until we've got confidence in the small plots. But we certainly realize that there's a lot of learning there. There's maybe 80% of the learning there, and the other 20%, the fine tuning is when we get to the field. So. Thank you all very much for your.
Thank you.
Thank you. Extremely, yes, sir. Thank you. All right. Steve still with us? There you are.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's afternoon, I'm sorry.
Yep, afternoon
Good
already.
afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. I have one last opportunity to bore you with a discussion of our facilities here. And I want to thank Kelly Landis, who's in the back, who is my fleet facilities and asset specialist, who helped put this PowerPoint together, but more importantly, has helped shepherd through a lot of our projects that have occurred over the last several months. So she's going to be taking on a bigger role as I step out, and she'll be taking over the big project. She doesn't know that yet, but she will be. So, I want to talk to you a little bit about our facilities issues, what we have going on now, our completed projects, current projects, and what we're going to be doing looking ahead. Now, I say we, obviously, my successor and my staff will be doing this, but we are trying to plan ahead. Our facilities issues, we had a building inspection report done, as many of you know, in 2016. That report brought out a huge number of issues we had here. Exterior, you can look around and see the exterior issues, interior issues, HVAC systems that are old, outdated, and basically many of them on their last legs. Some of those issues included sidewalk and parking lot issues, ADA compliance issues, and building issues such as rotting wood, roof system being old, ground and site work, and settlement of the buildings. This is a prime example. This is right behind Mr. Lloyd over here.
Yeah, we about to fall in up here.
The area was totally, we were starting to have water coming in. We had our handyman go out, rip that out, and replace it. This is kind of an example of what we're looking at when we start getting into this. He was able to, I hate to say it, cobble together a repair at least to keep the water out, which is kind of our key right now. Seeing is what is behind there. We kind of getting an idea what to expect if we start doing things around here. And one of the issues I've discussed is, well, if we try to do the siding, that's going to lead to this, which is going to lead to that, which is going, and it's just going to be a top to bottom project, no matter how you do it. So we're doing remedial measures we can now. We're trying to do that as cheap as we can, essentially, so we're not spending a great deal of taxpayer dollars just to go back and redo it in a year. Our parking lot, you can see that you see that. The lines are faded. Markings are no good. We do have a contract for that now. We expect that to be completed in April. Interior issues include water intrusion, paint, office carpeting. This is an example of what we found in a wall. This is, remember we had the berms moved from the middle? Part of the reason for that was water intrusion. Well, this is actually on a farther south side, one that we did not have removed. That is, the electrical outlet quit working. The electrician came in and found that the entire circuit was full of water, shorted out, and he was able to bypass it and run an exterior pipe, and we were able to get the electric restored. But that is a great concern right now, is that water coming in through those walls. This was an example of the flooding that occurred. We have remediated, this was the copy room right across the breezeway. We've remediated that with getting some sealer put in, getting the berm taken out, and getting that resolved. We did get the new carpeting from the flooding, if you recall, so we were able to get that done. HVAC system, we have a total of 20 units. Their average age is 21. That's actually down from the 2016 building report when that system, I believe there were 26. So we've brought them down by replacing units. We have issues with the air handlers and the outside compressors. So we address those as we go along. A lot of our issues are we have mismatched air handlers with compressors. You have a bigger air handler than a compressor or vice versa. And if any of you ever work with HVAC, you know that doesn't work. That just leads to problems. And our assessment has been, do we repair or replace? In most cases, the decision is let's replace. They're old, decrepit. It's time to replace them. Some of our completed projects, 2019, we had an electrical issue where the front parking lights were either staying on or not coming on. Very bizarre. We had an electrician come in, he worked on that, found the wiring was a little bizarre, did some work on it, Still not sure we've got this issue completely resolved, but the good news is the lights come on when they're supposed to, seem to go off when they're supposed to, and the gate works. So we're happy with that. We had a fire marshal inspection, and that led to some compliance measures we had to take, including installing a new repeater box out here in the lobby, the Knox box, so they can get in when they need to, and labeling all of our, it's amazing how many rooms we have here who have electrical panels. So as you walk down the halls of our building now, you will see on the outside of the wall, electrical panel inside. We had to label those. We then went in, Ashley Spivey, if you remember her, she and I spent an evening here until almost 9 o'clock one night, just trying to locate breakers, what they operated, where they went to, and in a fit of frustration, I think we finally surrendered, having maybe accomplished 50% of the task, because of just, you turn off a breaker and you walk the entire building and find nothing impacted. So we just turned it back on and said, you know, maybe what we should have done is left it off and somebody could have come in and complained. But live and learn. Let's see. The electrical power consolidation, you all recall one of the big issues when I got in here was that we didn't have generator power for the Santa Fe room and for this room. And the executive wing did not have backup generator power. We consolidated the power so that we put the main building and the executive wing on a single meter, and now they all have generator backup. The only place here that does not have generator backup is the Kirby building. And we are considering alternatives for addressing that issue. You've seen some of this before. We installed light sensing or movement sensing light switches in most offices and conference rooms, so that no one's in the room, light goes off. You all remember your dad running around going, "Is somebody in this room? Turn the light off." My wife does that to me. They completed the lobby restroom renovation, and we completed the remodel of this room. If you recall the wonderful big screen TV we used to have over there, we completed Tyler's IT suite so that he's got more functionality up there. And most recently, we added a fire escape to that, which you'll see. 21 through 24, we're pretty busy in relocating. You recall we did the big AC project where we relocated units and added a IT system to protect the server room. Renovated the Kirby building so we could have office space in there. We did those drainage projects to address the flooding that occurred. We installed a new lab facility, which I think Susie's team is pretty happy with, out in the Kirby building. You all visited that a few months ago. Replaced the carpet in the main building. We removed the two earthen berms, 4 of them actually. Installed the escape emergency exit in the IT suite. When we did that, we had a active shooter training session here. And Tyler was up in his IT suite, and Tyler came out and saw me after, and he goes, "What do I do?" I offered, we cut a hole in the floor, you can have a rope ladder, you can just drop down like a fireman, but it's not tall enough under there, so we went ahead and built him an escape route. So he now has an emergency exit with a motion sensing light outside, custom-made rail. It's a beautiful thing. We replaced units 1 and 5 for the HVAC system. I'll show you some pictures of Unit 1 in a minute. But we took that to a more efficient system, larger. The air handler inside on that was so bad, we'd had the pan repaired a dozen times. It was more caulking than aluminum. So we had that taken out, got a new air handler put in, and so far, it's working great. We had the Kirby building. This is an interesting project because part of our Kirby building is our bays. If you've been out there, like a big warehouse. Well, we're having water intrusion coming in. It was getting into the insulation inside. We had Ogle's Roofing come out. They went up there, took a look. They cleaned it. replaced the skylights, did some sealing. We haven't had a leak since. But Warren went out and he said, it's so bright out there, I had to wear my sunglasses. Where previously, even with the lights on, you could barely see. So made a major difference in the work environment out there. And finally, we completed just 2 weeks ago, I think, the lobby wall renovation. Again, we had water intrusion there. Our contractor came in. I think he did a pretty good job of resolving that issue for us. That's Tyler's fire escape. The city inspector actually asked the contractor who built that ladder for him, because he wanted to get one, or the county inspector. This is the lobby wall. This is what they uncovered when they started working up there. You can see the rot that was around there. Again, a preview of what's to come when we start doing our renovations here. And this is the finished product. We thought they did a pretty good job. That is the interior view. This is, of course, the berms. This is the front berm where the flagpole is. This is post removal. I do want to again compliment Gateway for the work they did. The walls, as I mentioned previously, were coated with a variety of water barriers, whether it was derby gum on one side, roll roofing on another, tar paper, and just rolled on tar. And they went in and had to scrape and burn all of that stuff off. Then they sealed and painted, and that was beyond the scope of their contract. And the contractor said, and I quote, "I just can't leave it that way." Thank you. So saved us some time. This is the back berm. As I know you've seen these pictures before, you can see the water being held there, and you can see just how high up that went on the building. And that's where we did have some water intrusion. Warren Spring would be right in this area. Over in here, we had water intrusion. And of course, this is post removal. Again, staff preference was leave it open. And till they complain and say, you know, we do want some trees or we want something in there, I think that it looks very nice that way. Finally, this is not finally, but this is HVAC System 1 outside. You can see just how bad condition it is in. Unfortunately, the slab it was on wasn't big enough for the new unit, so we had a slab put in by our handyman, and we had a new AC system installed. It took them 3 days to get it in, but luckily it wasn't too hot or too cold, and staff was able to tolerate the inconvenience. But previously, when that unit would kick on outside of Lorna's office, just outside Santa Fe room, it sounded like a freight train taking off. Now you barely hear it. So much better job, and it's doing a much better job of cooling the hallway. HVAC System 1, which was 5, which was replaced, was down further on Warren's Hall, and the same concept is much nicer down there. I've gotten far fewer complaints about it being too hot or too cold since we had that unit done. Current projects, the old lab renovation building that is in process. We have the contract signed. We did an amendment just recently to that contract to incorporate some additional terms and conditions. But the price is set on that, and they are underway. This will convert what used to be our lab building into a hydrological workspace and storage, shipping, and receiving. This is a massive project. It's going to be a complete interior and exterior renovation. They will be stripping all the walls, both sides. The roof's going to come off, be replaced. A new electrical system, new plumbing, new floors, and 2 new HVAC systems. And they're doing it for under $850K. So we feel fairly confident in the pricing and in the quality of work we're going to get. HVAC systems, we're going to continue to work and replace those as we need to. And the parking lot restriping, as I previously mentioned, anticipate the front being done in April. This is the old lab. And some of the changes that will be made is that this is going to become two solid steel doors There'll be a larger concrete slab here for bringing in, shipping and receiving, bringing in products that are delivered. They're going to actually put an overhang on both sides of the building. This right now is flush, so the water just drips right down the siding. So they're going to make some improvements. They're going to convert to a standing seam metal roof. They're also doing the parking garage or the pole barn back here at the same time, just changing the siding and new roofing so that it will look consistent with the lab. And looking ahead, our top 3 priorities are safety and security throughout district offices for governing board employees and the public. We continue to address those issues as best we can. As I said, we can do piecemeal work, but for the most part, we're trying to do things so we don't have to duplicate the work down the road. We're consistently exploring options for safety and security. Among the things we're just doing is putting first aid kits in every vehicle, as well as fire extinguishers. We just bought 66 new fire extinguishers, or however, 20-something new fire extinguishers, I'm sorry, to go into our vehicles. So every vehicle will have a new fire extinguisher. Our critical air conditioning systems, 2 of those have been completed. The IT system, we got the new and the backup for the server room. We replaced those in 2023. Next is record storage. That unit is relatively new, but we're going to start looking at it and seeing if we need to move towards that. And finally is the exterior renovation and remodeling. This is the total exterior project. We've talked about it a couple of times. I will tell you there is money in the budget, different amounts in each budget, so it is going to be a conference issue. We don't know where we'll land, but thanks to Ben and Tyler and Hugh working the issue very hard up there, I think we'll get the money. We'll get enough to at least get a good start. But you can see there what that project will include, which is easy way of saying everything. One of the things we're definitely going to have to do is address settling on this side of the building, the executive wing, the ramp, that deck is going to have to come off. Going to get the settlement addressed and then figure out a way for you guys to get out in the event of a fire or emergency. So that said, hopefully we'll know by, I guess, March where we're going to end up financially. So maybe next meeting I can give you some good news on that. With that, Madam Chair, I'll answer any questions. I know I'm standing between you and lunch, and I hate that position.
Any questions on our facilities? Nope. It was very comprehensive. Thank you very much.
And with
All
that,
right, so we will adjourn our workshop and follow Robin to lunch. Do we need a motion to adjourn, Robin? Okay.